Hi, and welcome to the condensed version of the Access 365 Master Course. My name is Bruce Myron, and I retired a few years ago after more than 30 years as a database consultant to small and medium-sized businesses. I've made several courses since then, but I think this Master Course is the best one yet. This 3-hour condensed version contains selected videos from the full 14-hour course, but it will still show you the basics of Access and get you productive with the program. A link to the full version is in the description below if you're interested. On the screen, I've got the table of contents for the full 14-hour course, and the videos included with this 3-hour condensed version are in bold. Each video will start with a graphic that'll show you exactly where you are in the table of contents, and you can also click in the description. There'll be a list of all those videos and a link so you can jump right to that spot. So I think you'll enjoy this course. Let's get started. If you're looking for an Access course that'll show you as quick as possible how to make a really powerful database that exactly addresses your needs, I think you found your course. Hi, my name's Bruce Myron. I'm not like a lot of instructors. I'm not certified in anything. All I have is 30 years of making my living as a database developer for small and medium-sized business. I've learned how to make databases simple, quick, effective. I've also spent a lot of years training people in Access, and I've learned a couple of things. First thing I've learned, people can't take too much all at once. They need to learn, it's kind of like driving a car. You need to learn the basics first. You need to actually have hands-on and get that down and then go to the next step. I've also found that people really respond to having an identifiable goal at the end. Driving a car, you know what it is, but here we have a specific database that we're going to build. You have one that you can download right after the first video, and then we'll keep working on that through the entire course. There is a lot of extraneous information in Access you don't use that much, and so I just leave all that out. I focus on the things that you use all the time. So we go through and build this database, and it doesn't show you everything that we talk about, but it gives you a good feeling about what we're going to do in the course. There's a free preview of it in the introduction section of the course. Now, you may not have customers and orders like in that demo, but really what we're learning about is how to manipulate data. I never specialized in a certain kind of business because I found that when you can manipulate data, you can do it for any business, no matter what it is. And I've seen them all. So that's what you're going to learn. If you go through the course, you will be a master at Access, and you will amaze your friends, your coworkers, your boss, and it'll be one of the best things you've done for yourself. So I encourage you to click the Buy Now button, and let's get started. Okay, so let's get started with Access 365. I'm on a computer with a fresh install of Windows 10, and I just installed Office 365, and I thought I'd wait a second and go ahead and install the Access icon here. I'm going to click on the Start button. Here's Access. I'm going to right-click on that and go to More, and on the little side menu, I'll open the file location. And it has a list of all the shortcuts. I'm going to right-click and hold on Access and just drag it down here. And when I let go, I get the little menu, and I'll select Copy. Then I can close this File Explorer menu or window. And now I want to pin it to the taskbar. So I'm going to right-click and hold on the shortcut, and I'll drag it down here just to the right of Excel. Then I'll let go of the mouse button, and it puts it on the taskbar. That's probably 90% of the time I use the taskbar to go into Access, because you'll have the whole screen taken up most of the time. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'll click on Access on the taskbar, open it up, and let's make a blank database. So I'll click on Blank Database, and I'll just call it MyDB, and I'll click on Create, and you can see it's going to put it into the Documents folder. Now I've already done that once before, so I'll replace the existing file. Okay, and it opens up and it makes something, it starts to create something called a table. I'm going to go ahead and close that. See, the word table on this tab has an X to the right of it. I click on that and it goes away. Now let me make this screen partial screen, and let me open up Excel. I like to use Excel as kind of a contrasting program because people are really familiar with it. I love Excel. I use it every day. But a lot of times we also drift into using Excel as a database, and that's not what it was meant for. So let me click on blank workbook. And that's one of the first changes. Now, I didn't have to give it a name like I did with Access. So why is that? What you'll find in the next section is Access forces you to name and save the database, so that when you type data into the database, it's automatically saved when you move off that row. That's so that other people can open the same database and share your data. So we'll do that in the next section, and I'll link to another computer and you'll see that. We'll work on the same table, same time. So that's why it does that. Otherwise, there's some similarities. It's got a menu. Each menu selection has its own ribbon. So if I click on Insert down here on Excel, it changes the ribbon. I go back to Home. The icons have groups. You can see these little group names underneath. Same thing up here with Access. I can click on the Create menu, External Data. So I've got different ribbons with each one of these menu commands. Outside of File and Home, though, they're completely different. File is used pretty much the same way. It's you can do different options and things. And we'll do that during the course. Right now, I'll just click on the little left arrow to come back. So that's like Excel also. Now, let me go ahead and close Excel. The thing that is really different, if I maximize my Access screen, is that outside of that ribbon and menu structure, there's really nothing here. It's just a blank screen. And you've got this thing on the left that says All Access Objects. So let's go over what this is, and then we'll talk about why this screen is blank. I just clicked on this thing that says All Access. You can't see the whole word. I could widen it if I just put my cursor right here. I can make this a little wider, and you can see that it's saying All Access Objects. So if I click on that, I have a menu of possible selections, and you can see check marks next to the ones that are selected. So by default, it selects object type, and it's All Access Objects. You can see different dates and ways you can modify the list. There's nothing here, so you really can't see how that works. But notice that right here are 4 objects. Okay, those are the 4 primary objects in Access, and that's why you don't just start out with a grid like you do in Excel. You've got 4 different objects: tables, queries, forms, and reports. And if I go up here to Create on the menu, you'll see we've got matching groups. Here's tables, queries, forms, and reports. So that's more difficult to get into. It takes longer to learn Access than it does Excel, but the payoff is huge. So the question really is, are you going to invest a few hours to learn what will save you hundreds of hours potentially in the future? What I'd like to do is to just pause right here with this big black section here, and let me superimpose a video over this and explain to you how these 4 objects work and why they can save you a ton of time. Now, just before we go into that little video, I want you to download and open up a PDF that I have that lists the 4 objects. Actually, there's 6 objects, but there's the 4 major ones that we're dealing with right now. And if you're on the video and it's full screen, click on the little arrow at the bottom right corner. See this here, it's circled. In Udemy, you'll be able to click on that and it will shrink the screen. And then what you can do is you should see up at the top, at the right side, there's the course content. You should see a little resources box. And if you click on that, it'll have the objects PDF in it. Let me open it up here for you. Okay, so it's objects in Access. Let's go over what these first 4 do. Tables, it's the only object that'll hold data permanently. Reports are formatters for the output of data to a printer. They can be used for other things, but that's the primary use. Queries give you the ability to select data, and you can use them as the source between tables and reports. There's also many other things that they can do. They can manipulate data and also do calculations and totaling and things like that. Really amazing capabilities with totaling. If you've tried to do a lot of subtotaling in Excel, you'll be amazed by these. Forms, we talked about, can be used on tables or queries and are used to control data entry and make the database appear much more user-friendly. So let's get started. Let me put a video here and we'll play it, and we'll take a look at what these examples of what these things can do for you. So let me take a few minutes to show you how these four objects, tables, reports, queries, and forms, can save you a huge amount of time. If you're like most people, you're using Excel as a database. If you're doing, let's say it's the month of April, and you've got sales reports that you have to do. So the sales report in April, you're moving data around in an Excel spreadsheet really until you get it like you want it to look on the printer, and then you print it out. With Access, you don't do that. What you do instead is through the month, you're just entering the sales data into a table. And you're not even concerned about what it looks like on a report. It might be totally different in order and sequence than your eventual sales report. When it comes at month end, you can then have a sales report, a report object that formats the data properly. It could look exactly like what you've been doing in Excel. But all you have to do is double click on the sales report. It's going to pull a copy of the data and it's going to format it. You're going to be able to print it out. Now, the time saving comes from the fact that you can also have a payment report. You could have the sales data showing all the payments against previous sales, and it'll pull all that out. You could have sales by salesperson. You could have it sorted a different way with a page break at the end of each salesperson, so each one gets their own sales report. You could have a top product sales report that sums up the sales by product and shows you the top 10, 20, whatever. You could do the same thing for customers. Who are the top sales customers? Sales by product report. A lot of these reports people don't do because they just don't have the time. And here, it only takes a double click for each one of these reports. Later on with automation, you'll find that you could run all 6 of these reports by just clicking a button and save even more time. Now, that's great for April, but what happens with May and June and July, all the subsequent months? How do you do that? What you end up doing with Access is you just have a sales table for all months. You'll find that Access can hold years and years and years of data, hundreds of thousands of records, and it's just not a problem. So you put all the data in, you just keep putting it in for all your months, but then, you know, if you do a report, isn't it going to print everything out? You change it up a little bit, and instead you use the next kind of object, a query, and that query can be set up to pull the same data as the report, but only for certain dates. Every time you run the query, it asks for a beginning date and an ending date. We'll do that in the course. You'll see how that works. Then what you do is you base the report on the query, not directly on the table. So now, even if you have 10 years worth of data, you can double click on the sales report and it'll say, enter the beginning date. And you could put in April 1, April 30 as the beginning and ending dates, and it'll come right out. And again, with automation, I could put those dates in once and do all the reports for those dates. So Access really increases your productivity. You don't have these big spikes at the end of the month with report preparation. Generally, you just don't have any more work that day than a few extra double clicks. Now, another way that Access saves a lot of time, you've got your data table, your query, your report. It saves time on the front end. You can use table properties and forms to make sure that the data is correct when it's entered in the first place. There's a huge industry out there on purifying Excel data. There isn't a corollary industry for Access data. Why is that? It's because you have too much control over that data in the first place. Table properties, for instance, if you set up a column for order dates, all you can put in there is dates. You can't put a piece of text. I've seen over and over again offices where there's something wrong with a report, and I research it and find, well, somebody put NA in the date column and they messed it up, or they just thought they were in another column and they typed into the wrong place. You can't do that if you set up your Access database properly. Then to cap it off, you can use forms to do all the original data entry, and forms give you an amazing amount of control. They're free form. You don't have to have the sequence that you have in the table. You can have data entered in any sequence that you want, and it'll put it in the table properly. You can actually have instructions right on the screen with the form, so it makes it really obvious what to enter. You can use combo boxes, which are way more powerful than anything like a VLOOKUP in Excel. You'll find it is unbelievable how powerful combo boxes are, and we will go over those in detail. You'll be an expert when we're done. Also, forms can contain checkboxes, other Windows type things. You just click on the checkbox to indicate true, false, yes, no. Forms can do calculations. We're going to do that where we have a unit price and we put in a quantity and press enter, and the calculation is done for the total. Forms can have tabs, so if you have too much information on the screen, you can make a tab control where each tab has a box that can contain several different controls. Really, all the Windows style controls you're used to using, you can use in Form. So it makes it really powerful and gives you all the control that you need. In the next video, we'll open the database that we're going to use for the rest of the course, and I'll show you examples of the finished forms that we're going to make, and really the entire functioning database. So I'll see you then. Okay, in the previous video, we created a new blank database, and it was pretty blank. There wasn't much on the screen, but we did go through an introduction to the four major parts: tables, queries, forms, and reports, and how they interact with each other. So to go to the next step, I want you to download this Access 365 database that's in the resource link. We'll be using this for the rest of the course. I'm going to double click on it, open it up. And in this database, there are lots of examples of all four of the major objects. We are going to create from nothing each one of those objects: tables, queries, forms, and reports. But it really helps to have some finished ones. And also there are things that I like to show you when it's more complex. But I also like to show you done examples. So you'll see a lot of things with done at the end. I think all of the queries here, a lot of the forms and reports, they have done, so that when we're creating it in the course, if something's wrong, you can open that and compare it to what you've got. So it helps a lot. What I want to do in this video is to familiarize you with what's called the navigation pane. I just referred to it as this object or this structure on the left. It's called a navigation pane, and if I click on it, we've already seen that it's by default showing you object types, and it's showing you all the Access objects. It's got a list of the four primary ones here. If I click on one of those, if I just click on tables, it reduces the list to just looking at the tables. If I click on it again, go to queries, I can cycle through and do all of the different objects. So sometimes if you get a lot of things on the navigation pane list, you might want to do that. One other thing you can do, though, if I click on it again and go back to all Access objects, notice that to the right, here's tables. All the way to the right, there is a little double arrow pointing up. If I click on that, it will just collapse that list. So I can still see that it's tables and these are queries. I can click on the down, now it's down pointing, so I can click on that to open it up. Here I can open up the queries. Okay, so it's easy to manipulate that list. Now let's take a look at how we look at the individual objects. Easiest way is just to double click. Now I want you to use students done. Double click on students done. It's just a little table of students that I've got in here, and we'll be creating this. Notice that when you do that, there's an extra couple of menu selections up here. Notice also here's students done, here's the name, and it's got an X on this little tab. Let's look at the menu and look at the ribbon up on the top. Well, you click on the X to close the table. Okay, notice those two things go away. If I double click again, they come back. So it's adding to the menu. Okay, it's got table tools as a title for this new menu extension, and it's got fields and table. Each one of those things, if I click on that, has got its own ribbon. Okay. But I do notice that when I do open it, even though they are there, I still stay on the home menu selection. It doesn't move me over there. Now, on the left of this home ribbon, notice there is a little group called views. It just has one icon in it, and it's got something that looks like some drafting tools. That is the icon for design view. If you click on that, you'll go to the design view of this table. Now, I know you don't know anything about how this design works. In this video, I don't want you to worry about all the details. You'll become comfortable soon enough with how all this works as we go through it. But a lot of people don't realize there's a couple little idiosyncrasies with how you open and close things. So I want to make sure you've got that down. Now notice that the views icon has changed. Now it's called a data sheet icon. If I click on that, it goes back to what's called the data sheet, the view of the table where I can see the information I've typed into it. Now, if you click the pull down, right underneath it, there's a little arrow pointing down. If I click on that, you can see that there's the two views and they're labeled. So here's design view, here's data sheet view, but it's just as easy to go back and forth just using that one icon. Okay, so once you open up something, you can go to design, you can go back to the active view, you can close it at any time. Okay, and notice also when I click on design, there is a design menu up here for the table also. Okay, now let's go ahead and close the table. Let's see what that looks like in a query. Here's a query, top students done. Double click on that. Okay, and a query we found out in the last video can pull a copy of data, and that's what this is doing. It's pulling a list of the students with the top GPAs. Okay, and you'll know how that works. But what I want you to realize now is it looks pretty much the same in that it's got this design view. I can go to design, I can go back to data sheet, just like on a table. Okay, it looks pretty much the same. It does not give you, when you're in the query, a new table tools menu, but it does give you a design menu. So if I click on design, I've got a design menu here. And notice that it's a little bit different when you're in design. It puts you on the word design. Okay. Okay, so I'll go back to data sheet view and let's close the query. Let's go to the next thing. One more thing I forgot about queries. If I double click top students done again, let me pull down the view and notice that there are three, not two views. We were going back and forth automatically between data sheet and design, but there is another view called SQL. If I click on it, all it shows you is the structured query language. There is a language called SQL. It's not an Access thing, it's a database thing. There's a lot of pretty large database products that use SQL as the language to query and pull out copies of data. What you'll find is that Access's queries are visual front ends for creating the commands in SQL. I can never remember all the syntax of SQL. I don't have to because the queries do that for me. So we'll use this SQL view a lot. So I'll click on close to close that. Let's double click on another object, customer auto. Just double click that. This is a form. Don't worry about all the parts and pieces here. But notice again, you've got a design view. If I click on design, okay, it takes me to design, but notice there's three design menus. It says form design tools, and I can click on each one. It has its own menu. Okay, notice that on arrange and format, the views group goes away. So if I want to go back to the finished form, I have to click on design, and there it is. I can click on the form, and I can go back and forth just like before by clicking on this. Now let me pull it down. Notice there is also a third view here. It's called data sheet view. I hardly ever use it, but if you click on that, it just shows you the data that the form is based on. It doesn't have its own data. Remember, the only thing that holds data permanently is a table. So this is either the table or the query that this form is based on. Okay, and then I can continue and go back to design. I can go back to the finished form. I need to click on home. There, I'm on the finished form and I can close it with the X. Okay, let's double click on orders by date done. Okay, so a report formats for the printer. And again, we're not going to worry about the details. We're just going to look at the different views. Now, if I pull this down, notice there's 4 views for a report. And notice it's highlighted the one I'm in. I'm in report view. I can go to layout view, and I can go back and forth between those two. That's the default. Layout view is like report view. It shows you what it's going to look like, but it lets you size the columns while the report is live, which is really nice because you can see how it fits with the data. Now there's 2 other views though. If you go to design, this kind of looks like the form design. Okay, there's a lot of details here you don't know about yet, but it does have a design view. And notice it has a design tools set of menu selections. Okay, I'll go back to home, or actually I can go to design, and there's the views menu again. I'll go to print preview. Now report view, if I go to that, it shows what the report looks like. How is that different than print preview? Print preview actually breaks this up into pages. Okay, if I go down, there's the bottom of the page, and you can see this has 122 pages on it. I wouldn't want to accidentally print that, but notice that the views menu is gone and there is no way to get back to it. I'm on a print preview menu selection, and all I can do is print. What you have to do in print preview, it's different than any other view of any of these objects, is you have to close print preview here on the right. Okay, so you don't want to hit that print by accident and start printing 122 pages. Okay, you would have to, it would show you the printer, let you select the printer, and then you'd click OK after that. Okay, so let me close orders. Orders by date done. Those are the 4 objects. What we're going to do is go through a section for the basics for each object. Basics on tables, basics on reports. I'll go through that after tables. Then we'll go through basics on queries, then forms, and there's actually an extra table section in there that talks to you about how do you design your tables. So there'll be 2 sections on tables. Then we're going to go back through in a more advanced way and do the same thing. We'll do advanced tables, reports, queries, and forms, and it will really start to be a lot of fun. I had a student last week say, you know, I feel like I've gained a superpower because I can make the computer do all these things with data that my coworkers are just amazed. And that's the fun part. You don't have to be a slave to working with thousands of records of data. So that's the overview. We're going to stay on this database for the rest of the course. Join me in the next section and we'll build our first table. I'll see you then. Okay, so let's get started with tables. We'll go over basic tables and we'll start by creating our first table. Click on Create on the menu and select Table Design. Now it brings you up to a grid and it is called Field Name in the first column. I'm just going to put in first name and press Enter to move to the second column. So each item of information that you say, first name, last name, city, address, anything, it's a field. Okay, so that's a database jargon term, one of 2 that I'm going to give you. So a field of information. And in Access, you have to indicate, okay, for that field, what type of data are you going to put in there? The default is short text, and there's a pretty long list, if I click on the pull down here, that shows you all the different kinds of data types. I do have a PDF tied to this video in the resources box, and I'll open that up and you can see here's short text, the default, alphanumeric values, letters or numbers or punctuation up to 255 characters. You can do long text, but rarely used. It's up to 64,000 characters. It actually holds them in a little invisible separate table that you don't see. Then you got numbers. If I pull this down again, you can see there's numbers, different kinds of numbers, dates, currency, all different kinds of things. And we'll go through each one of these. For now, I'm just going to keep short text. I'll press enter to accept that. That goes to a third column, description. I don't really use this very often. It's optional. All it does is whatever you type in here, you can view it when you're looking at the design of the table. I'm going to just press enter again, and it'll wrap down to the next column, next row. And I'll put in last name. Again, that's short text. And let's say we want to know their GPA. Okay, their GPA grade point average, and I'll press enter. Now that's not going to be short text, it's going to be a number, but I want you to notice one thing that's different about numbers. There's a lot of sub types within a number. So I'm going to press N for number, but just before I do that, look down at the bottom of the page. Do you see where it says field properties? So this is the properties of whatever field I'm on, and we'll go through these properties in detail. But notice that this is the field properties. It says field size 255. That's because I haven't pressed enter yet. It's still the default short text. Watch what happens when I press enter to lock in the fact that I've chosen number. It changes the properties, and then it has field size as the first property. If I click on that row and go all the way to the right, there's a pull down. If I click on that, there's a whole bunch of different numbers here, okay? And this is where, and the default is long integer. This is where the PDF comes in handy. Again, if I click on that, it shows you that integers, and you may have forgotten this from math class, but an integer is a whole number, no decimals. So a long integer, this shows you the range, plus or minus 2 billion. But then it gets into number single, and that was on the list. That single and then number double. Single and double just refer to how much space is allocated inside Access, inside the actual file. So the numbers are just bigger that it can hold, but it will let you do decimal numbers. So I'm going to select a single. So I'm going to go back here. I'll click back here, which will hide the PDF. I'll click the pull down once again, and I want a single. See, there's the double. And that's what you'll use. You'll use long integer. Sometimes you use integer, single, or double. Those are the ones you'll use almost all the time. I'll click on single. That's going to let me put in a GPA with a decimal point like 3.75. I'll press enter to go to the next line. And let's say a yes-no field. We can put in a field called enrolled, and I'll hit the letter Y for the data type. That would indicate, are they enrolled, yes or no? I'll press enter, and notice what it did to the properties here on the bottom. I can make the format yes, no. I can click on this true, false, or on or off. Most of the time you use yes, no, but you can change it. Okay? And that'll show up as a little checkbox. So we'll see that. I'll press, let me click back up here, get out of the properties and press enter. Let's say we want their date of birth, DOB for date of birth. I'll press enter, and I'll just hit the letter D for date time. One of the things about a date data type, if I bring up the PDF again, excuse me, let's go to date time. It says date and time values. Now we'll go over that more later on, but have you ever worked with dates in Excel? If you do a date, actually let me do it. Let me open up Excel. Because dates are serial numbers, I'll just do a blank workbook, and let me bring it up here, and I'm just going to do control colon, that puts in today's date, okay? So 5/4/21. Now, if I right click on that and I change the formatting, format cells, and let's say just a number, notice what the number is. It's 44,340. That's the number of days since, what is it, January 1st, 1900, something like that. So there is a number, and if I go ahead and do that, okay, it puts that in as a number for the day. The decimal part is the time. So if I put in 44,340.5, that would be noon on that day. So be aware of that. I'm going to go ahead and close Excel. So you're always saving with a date. You're saving the date and the time. You don't have a separate time field. You do have formats that you can specify, just show the date, just show the time, or show both. Okay, so date and time. Let's see, what else do we want? We want a tuition. Tuition lets you put in a number type of field, but it's a specialized type. I'll hit the letter C. It's currency. So when you're doing dollars of any kind, just use a currency type. And then I'll press enter twice, and let's finish up with website. And I'll hit an H. That's a hyperlink. You don't use this as much, but it lets you put in links so that if you click on that, it'll open up a browser and go right to that website. Now, I've got a little table here. Let's go ahead and look at it. Remember, we've gone back and forth with tables using our view icon on the left. We can't do that directly since we've created this table. It's going to want to save it first. So I'll click on the datasheet view, and that causes Access to ask me to save the table. Yes, I do want to save it. Then it asks me for a name, and I'll call it students. I'll press enter, but it's going to ask me another question. It's going to say there's no primary key defined. And we're going to, I think 2 videos from now, we're going to go through. That video is going to be totally on primary keys. So for right now, I won't put one in. I'll just click no. And now I can see my table. Okay? Now, we mess with those properties a little bit. We'll go through them in more detail later. One property I like to change is with numeric or currency fields. It puts in a default of 0 on a blank record. So that means if I create a new record and I don't change these values, if I don't enter a GPA, it's going to be a 0. Okay, so I don't want it to do that. I want it to just be blank if I don't put anything in. So let's go back to design. This will be your first example of on something you've created, going back and forth using that view key. So on design, that was GPA. So I'll click on the GPA on the top, which means it shows the properties on the bottom. Notice there's a property called default value. I'll highlight that by just clicking and dragging across it with my mouse, and then I'll hit delete. I can do the same thing for tuition. If I click on tuition on the top, that'll show the properties of it on the bottom. I can click and hold and drag across it. Okay, and press delete. And now I'll click on view to go back to the data sheet. Since I've made some changes, it asks me to confirm that. I need to save the table. So I'll click yes. There we go. So now those are out of there. I can go ahead and start typing. Let's say I'm going to type the word John. Now I'm going to hit a capital J. Notice as soon as I do that, the very first thing I change, you get a little pencil here on the left edge. See that? That pencil means that this row is being edited, and this row is called a record. Okay, 2 jargon terms, database jargon terms in this video. First one is fields. We've already looked at that. The fields, first name, last name, each item that you save. But all of the fields together for one row, that's a record. So this would be the student record for John Smith, if that's the name I'm typing in. Okay, when you edit a record, you get this little pencil, and as soon as I move off of it, it's going to save that record. You can't forget to save. All you do is move off the record. So I'll go ahead and type John. I'll press enter, type in Smith. I'll put in like 3.75 as the GPA. Enrolled, I can just hit the space bar. Date of birth. Now I'm in the USA, so the format is month, day, year. If you're in Europe, it's different. It's determined by your Windows regional settings. So it might be a little bit different, but I'm going to type in, let's say 3101. Okay. Actually, I can do 311, and I'll press enter, and it'll put in the 2001 for me. And tuition, let's say it's 450. And I'll press enter. So it puts the $ in there, and website, let's just use Google as a test. And then I'll press enter. So that's my first record. Now, you might not have noticed, but as soon as I pressed enter on Google on the right edge, the pencil went away. Okay, that means that record is saved. If I just turn the computer off, or if the power went out right now, John Smith would be in this students table, in this database. So it has saved it automatically. We'll find, I think 3 videos from now, I'll show you an example of 2 computers using the same table at the same time. And you'll see how you make a record change on one, it'll show up on the other one. Incredibly valuable networking capability that Access has. Now let me just put in another record. Sally Jones, let's say she's got a 3.5 and she's not enrolled, and I'll put in 225.99, and let's say 375. And I'll just leave the website blank. So you see that it's pretty easy to enter information. What I want to do in the next video is to show you how to speed up a little bit on your data entry, and we'll go to a larger table so you can see how to move around when you do get a lot of records. So I'll see you in the next video. Okay, let's do a little bit more on this small table, and then I want to go to a larger one so you can see a little bit better how to move around. I want to put in a third record, and I'll just put in, let me click on the field here, Bob Anderson, 3.5. And let's say, and I won't even bother putting a date in, the thing I wanted to show you here was a quick way to duplicate the value in the previous record. If the tuition is the same, 375, I can hold the control key and press the double quote. That's usually just to the left of your enter key, so I'll just do control quote, and it just duplicates what's in that previous record. Also, you'll notice I've got this little asterisk here. That means I'm on a new record. So we saw the zeros in this earlier. It shows what would be in a new record once you put data into it. So if I come up here, it still stays there, but it's not a real record until I start typing. So if I start typing Jack, you can see the asterisk moves down. Now I'm going to press escape, and I'll do a control Z just to get rid of that, and it goes away. If I want to delete a record, these little boxes here to the left, notice when I put my cursor in them, I get a little arrow pointing to the right. If I wanted to delete, let's say Sally's record, the middle one right here, I could click right when I have that record selector, that's what the box is called, to highlight the entire row, and then I can press the delete key and it'll remove that record, and it says you're about to delete one record. So I'll press enter to confirm that. So to add a record, you go down to the asterisk. To delete a record, you use the record selector, and then you hit delete. I can, if I was way up here and I didn't want to scroll down to the asterisk, 2 ways I could do that. I do not use the ribbon very much at all because there's a lot of movement keys I can use, but you could use this new. And notice in there it shows you the keyboard shortcut. Actually, let me highlight it again. There you go. It says control plus a plus, and I can do that too. Control plus, and it jumps down to the bottom. Now I've got a PDF that's going to show you all those keystrokes, and we'll do that on the larger table. Also, there is a record navigator down on the bottom. Notice it says 3 of 3 right now. I can use that. I can move with this left arrow, move up and down. So let's use that on a larger table. I'm going to double click. I'm going to leave this table right here, and so you can see that you don't have to close something to open something else. Double click on student list. It's pretty much the same structure, and I think I flip-flopped a couple of records. That's fine, but I've got like 20 records. Here it makes more sense that you'd want to use the new, or you could do control plus is even faster, or you could just click down on the asterisk to go to a new record. It's a lot more clear how the record selector could help, or the record navigator, excuse me. So I can use the arrow key. This arrow into a bar goes to the first record. The arrow to the right into the bar goes to the last record. What I like to do, I do not use that very much because I've got the keys I can use. Here's a PDF tied to this video, moving around and editing. So I want to go through these with you. Move to the next field is obvious. It's the enter key, but also tab or the right arrow. Shift tab or the left arrow. Let's try that. So if I'm here and I do tab, or shift tab goes back, okay, or right arrow, left arrow, enter, okay, and then you have to shift tab to go back. Next row is down arrow, preceding row is up arrow. That's obvious. But if I'm on a field and I press the end key, that goes to the last field. If I press home, I go to the first field, but only if I'm not in edit mode. Now, you might have noticed when I clicked on this field, I didn't have the highlighting. Okay, I just had a little cursor there. If I press the up arrow, it goes to the previous record and it selects it. Okay, but if I click on a field, I'm in what's called edit mode, and that's what this PDF goes over. Notice the first part is normal highlighted mode. The second part is edit or insertion bar mode. And a lot of these little details, it's worthwhile to learn because all the rest of the objects act pretty much the same way. When you're dealing with looking at records through a form or through a query, it's going to be the same thing. Now, let's see, we did move to the first field, last field is end and home. But if I'm in edit mode, end and home work differently. I can go home goes to the beginning of that particular cell or that field, and then end goes to the back. Okay, it's just like Excel in that regard. I'll go ahead and open this PDF again. So you can see how move to the start of the content is the home and the end goes to the end of the content. Okay, notice that moving up a line leaves edit mode, and down a line going to the next record leaves edit. And then of course the right and left arrow when you're in edit, just move right and left one at a time. But did you notice also that it said F2 key, enter or leave edit mode? A lot of people don't realize that F2 in Excel goes into edit. So if I'm on this field right here and I want to change the second letter to an O, for instance, it's really supposed to be RO, I'll press F2, I'll press home, right arrow, I'll hit delete, and then do an O. Okay, then I know when I press enter, it's going to lock it in. Okay, and I'm going to leave edit mode. Let me go back and put the A back in. F2, home, right, A, delete, enter. I find that it really speeds you up if you know those little edit keys. You know if I press F2, I'm going to be in edit mode. I know, incidentally, if I've clicked somewhere and I want to move, I know I can press F2 to just come out of edit mode. And then the arrow keys of the home and end will go to the right and left. Okay? The let's see, remove content. If you do have something highlighted, the delete key is going to wipe it out. Or if you enter new content, it's going to replace it with that new content. Notice that it says restore content is escape key or undo. So let's try that. If I'm right here on Brooks, if I type Smith, it's going to type that in. If I press escape, brings it back. If I press delete, it removes it. Escape brings it back. As long as I haven't moved off the field, I can do that. So be aware that if you're typing, you accidentally type something, you can do an escape. It'll bring it right back. And Control Z also. If I type something, I can do Control Z, which is undo. Okay? One thing I have not mentioned yet that I think is really valuable, especially with a larger table, is these two right here. Move to the first field in the first row. We've already seen that home goes to the left edge of a record, end to the right edge. What about control home and control end? Let me click back here and do control home. It goes to the first field in the first record. Control end goes to the last field in the last record. I know if I press enter now, I'm on a new record, for instance. Or I could do control and plus. Either way. So print that out and have that handy, that PDF, and go through that and make sure you know all these little movement keys. And also be aware that on the bottom of the PDF is how to select a record with the record selector, and then how to remove it by pressing the delete key. Okay, next we're going to go through primary keys in the next video, why you need them, how to add them to an existing table. I'll see you then. Okay, in this video I want to talk to you about primary keys and how to use a different type of data type in your table that we haven't talked about yet. I just noticed that I've got student list open and I've got students. If you go back and forth a little bit, you can see I didn't remember the sequence right. I've got GPA and enrolled switched. Let's say I wanted the students table to be just like this one. Have the enrolled first. What I'm going to do is go back to students and I'll click on the design button. And so I want enrolled first. Remember the record selector we just did to select the entire record? You've kind of got a record selector here, but it's a field selector. And it works a little bit different. What you do is when you click, it selects like the record selector inside of your table design. But then when you move your arrow back, you get this little white arrow leaning to the left. When you see that, you can click and hold and drag up. You can see it's just dragged that heavy line up one, and I'll let go. And so I've just swapped those two fields. Then if I go back to the data sheet view, it wants to save the changes, of course. So I'll click yes. You can see that now I've got the same structure. Okay. Now I'm going to close the student list. And what I'm going to do is, let's see, how do we want to do this? We want to put in a student ID as a primary key. Now, why would you want to do that? It's because you could have two students named John Smith. You've got to have, this is the first reason, there's two reasons. The first reason is you want to make sure that you can have duplicate values and tell these people apart, if you had two John Smiths, for instance. The second and even more important reason is access when you don't have a primary key. Literally, it's like taking a book, you're looking for something in the book and you're just looking at page 1, page 2, page 3. If you have an index, or excuse me, if you have a primary key, Access has a numeric key, it's already pre-done, and it will go right to that record instantaneously. And there's also more reasons for the primary keys. The entire next section will be dealing with those when we talk about how to design your tables and how to relate them together. So I want to add a student ID to this this table. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to do it a couple different ways. First, I'm going to do this. I'm going to click on the design and I'm going to put in student ID. Now I can click, and I like to have it at the top. I can click at the top and hit the insert key and then put in student ID as the new field. And I'm going to use the auto number type. Okay, we haven't talked about that. Here it is, auto number. Very special type. What it does, you can't put anything in this field. It automatically starts numbering. Every time you make a new record, it will put in a new number, and we'll see that in a second. The other thing I'm going to do, besides just select auto number, is I'm going to click on this button over here that says primary key. So primary key, auto number. Now I'm going to click on the view button, the data sheet button, and as always it wants to save the table, and what it does is it's already put in the first two numbers. So that's a change. Older versions of Access, you could not add an auto number to a table. You couldn't add an auto number field to a table that already had records. Now it will do that, but the only problem is it insists on starting at the number 1. So we'll see a way to get around that here in a second. Now, notice it says new on the record, on the new record, on the asterisk record on the bottom. It does not have a number there. You cannot force a number in there. All you can do is start entering a record. But if I just hit the letter A, as soon as I do, notice what it does. It moves the new down, the new record down. It knows I'm putting in a new record, and it immediately populates the student ID. Now I can do a Control Z, escape, and Control Z to get rid of that. Now if I do the letter A again, notice what it's done. It's put in a 4. It will never, this is another feature of auto numbers, it will never reuse a number. And you want that. You don't, some people want to have sequential numbers. Don't do that. Make it a unique number. I don't care what the number is. On a big database, all I know is that it's unique, and I know it's never going to be duplicated. That's what's important when you're hooking things together. You never want to reuse a number and then potentially have orders from somebody else hook into your table because the numbers match. So that's why auto number is a perfect type of field for primary keys. Now, the only problem I referred to already is that sometimes you want to start it at something other than 1. Okay, so let's do this. Let's go back to design. Let's dump this student ID. I'm going to click on the selector and I'm going to hit delete, and it says, do you want to delete? Yes, I do. And it says that's the primary key. That's fine, so I'll say yes. So I'm back where I started from. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to close this table, and this is called students, the table that we made, and I'm going to press F2 to go into edit mode. I'm going to click at the end, or I could have pressed the end, and I'm going to call it students old, okay? Because I cannot set the start value on an auto number if there's already records there, okay? I need to go with a blank structure. So what I'm going to do is I've renamed this to students old. I'm now going to copy the structure by itself to students. Okay, so all I have to do that, I've got students old highlighted. I'm going to do a Control C to copy. I'll now do a Control V to paste, but it gives me a choice. Structure in data is the default. I want structure only, and I'll get rid of all these extra words here and just edit it down to just the word students. That's why I called our other table students old. Okay, so now I've got students. I can right click on that and go to design. And now I'll put in the auto number again. I'll put in, just like we did before, I just clicked at the top, pressed the insert key, student ID, auto number, primary key, exactly the same steps as before. But now what I'm going to do is I'm going to close it. I'm going to close the table. I don't want to put any records in it. And I'm going to go right down here. Now, hopefully this won't confuse you because we're jumping ahead a little bit, but I've had so many questions on this, I decided to include it right now. Remember when I told you a query has 3 different views? It has the data sheet, it has the design view, it also has SQL. Go into design on this little query, and it is already in SQL view, because SQL, the structured query language, sometimes there's commands in there that Access won't let you get at directly, but you can still type them in directly. So in SQL, there is a command called alter table that lets you change the design of a table. And notice what this thing does. Alter table students, so that's the name of the table. Alter column student ID, so that's the name of what we just put in, student ID. And it sets it to a counter, but right here, this is what I'm after. Counter with the start value of 1001, and then it increments 1 number at a time, okay? Now, all I have to do with this query is run it. And I'm including this in the database so that you can see how this works and you can use it as a reference later. So when you have a query and you're about like this in an SQL format, you can't look at the data sheet. You have to run it. That's what this run button is. So I'm going to click on runs. It's going to look like nothing happens. So I click run, boom, seems like nothing happens. But if I go to students, if I open it up, double click, and I start typing, so I'll just start typing J. You'll see there's the 1001. So it has started at 1001. So as I put in our records, they'll just populate. Okay, now I'm going to not do that. And let me undo and close this. And I'll close the query. What we're going to do later on, when we get to queries, we're going to use a query that will append records from one place to another place. So I'll save the rest of this for that. Now we've got a students table that has the numbering to start where we want. Later on with the query, we'll be able to take these records, append them in one step to students, and it'll automatically number all of them. Okay? So that'll be pretty valuable. But what I want to do in the next video is we'll go through basic table sorting and filtering. I don't use a lot of this stuff on tables directly because, and some people get stuck there. You know, oh, this looks like Excel. You know, they get into a table that looks like this and they think, oh, wow, I can use this. I'm used to this. This is not where you want to be. Tables are just for holding data. You notice I haven't referred to the fonts and the sizes. It doesn't matter because all I want is the data. I can format it in a report. I can format what it looks like, the size and the font in a form. So all I care about is the data, and you'll find that forms are way more powerful, and VBA is way more powerful when we get to that, than doing this stuff manually on a table, okay? But we'll go through basic table sorting and filtering next. I'll see you in the next video. Thanks. Okay, in this video we'll go through sorting and filtering on tables, something that I hardly ever do, but this will lead you into better understanding of what we're going to do later, because you've got queries that will sort things, you've got reports that will do that, you can do settings on forms, and so really you won't be using things directly, you won't be doing this directly on a table very much. If I click on ascending, I'm sitting here in the first name, I can click on this little ascending on the toolbar and it sorts, or I could sort descending. I can do the same thing if I click on last name, but I can also pull down the little pull down. Notice there's still a sort right here. I'm going to click on remove sort for the first name and then click on the little pull down for last name, and it's the same thing, sort ascending, sort descending. I'll do a sort ascending. Okay, notice if I come back here and do a sort ascending, it kind of throws away the last name. That's because it sorts left to right. What you can do, you can, if I want to just click and hold on this first name, I can drag it over here. I'm still holding the mouse button down, and I'll let go. And now, let's see if I do the sort A to Z. Actually, let me do both of them. I'll click and hold. There we go. I clicked off of there to click a field and cleared the movement. I didn't want to move the column. I just want to select those two columns. And now I can do a sort ascending from here or from here. And it does it. See, I don't think I have any names that are the same, but if I had a couple of Smiths, you'd see that they'd be sorted by the first name. Okay? And this does not change the structure, moving these columns around. If I close this, and I can save the format changes. Note it says changes to the design. It's really just the format of the appearance. I'm going to say no, and then I'll open it up again, and I'm right back where I started. Okay? If I click on GPA, I can do the same thing. Sort. Let's sort largest to smallest. Okay? Notice that if I sort, and I'll use this one if I sort ascending, Blanks always sort to the top on just about any computer program. Knowing that, that's a good way to test. If you've got some data that you think is missing, just go to the table and click on the top record in that field and sort on ascending, and it'll bring it up to the top. And incidentally, that brings up another thing. You never have to worry about highlighting the whole thing. How you can, if you highlight just the middle column, Excel could get things out of whack with the other columns. It's impossible to do here because Access looks at each record as an individual unit, so it sorts the records by the column you're in, not just the column you're in. Same thing with date of birth. I can do oldest to newest, that type of thing. And of course with tuition. Now on each one of these things, if I just remove the sort, I can also have filters. So I can go to, there's the sorts. I can click on number filter. Notice it's got all the various values I have that are actually there. That's not very productive. What I really can use is these: equals a certain amount, does not equal a certain amount, less than, greater than, between. Let's say greater than 3.7, and I'll press enter. Okay, so now I've got a filter. Okay, I can click on that and clear the filter. I can do the same thing with dates. Actually, dates have quite a few more filters, especially if your dates are current. This isn't going to work for me because I've got a bunch of old dates, but I can do before or after or between, just like I did with the numbers. And the text, if I click on last name in text filters, usually what you'll do is begins with or contains. Let's see if I got contains ON Johnson. That's the only one. Okay, so I will clear the filter. What you want to be careful of is when you do any of these sorts. I'll sort A to Z, and now if I close the table, it's going to ask me if I want to save changes to the design, and I've always thought that is confusing. You're not changing the design of the table, you're just changing the format of the appearance of the table. And so you always want to say, no, I don't want to do that. Otherwise, it'll always be that way. You might have a setting you want to do for your table, but I do not like to do that because whenever I look at a table, I want to make sure I'm looking at all of the table. I don't want to, a month from now, forget that I set some filter and then think I'm looking at all the records. So you probably won't use that on your tables, but you will use something that will look a lot like that on your reports and your forms and queries. Okay, so we've got all the orders together. I'm going to go ahead and close these two files here, the invoice and the orders. What I want to do is show you a list of 3 rules that I use when I'm deciding how to design my table. So you got all this data here. Let me shrink Access again, and here's a PDF that's attached to this video called three rules to use when designing tables. And we'll go through these one at a time. And the first one is the biggest one. You have to identify one-to-many relationships. Okay, and I always ask the question, for one of these, can there be more than one of these? Now let me go back to Access. Looking at the orders, here's this Jamia Partners customer. Well, for this one customer, can there be more than one order? And we've already identified that, yeah, that's true. We're looking at one order, number 12, but there could be, and there probably are in this data, more than one order per customer. So that means we've got to split that data, split the customer data and the order data. So we know we're going to have at least 2 tables. Now, if you look over here to the right, we've got products with quantities. This section right here from prod code through the total. Okay, for each order, and in this case, I do have more than one for each order for this one order 12. Again, we answer the question, yes, we can have more than one of these product orders for an individual order. So that's 3 tables. We've got to have at least 3 tables. We've got to have customers, orders, and I like to call it what it is, order products. I'll make the third one. Also, I'm going to have three more tables. I'm going to have a table for the products because we're going to have to look up what the unit price is. And we're going to have a table for, I've got salespeople in my, I don't have it right here on the orders, but in the customers that I end up with, I have salespeople. So we'll have a sales lookup, and we'll also have a state lookup. So when you're filling in a new customer, you can select the state. So I'm going to end up with 6 tables. The 3 we're going to focus on, though, are customer orders and order products, and you can see them right here. If I double click on customer, this is the first one. Now I got these a little out of order, so this is Jamia Partners. Let's look up Jamia Partners. I'll just do a Control F, Jamia Part asterisk. Okay, there they are on the bottom. Asterisk means any other, there we go, any other characters. So Jamia Partners, 2631, and you can see this has a new field called Cust ID, a customer ID. That's a primary key, and we'll learn how to do that after we do the action queries. So I've got the company, name, address, city, state, zip, and phone. All that information you can see. I've also added in the salesperson email, a few other things, stats, customer sense, and things like that. So that is the customer information. Now, I've also got orders. If I double click orders, you can see here we're on order 12, the first order in numeric order. Here's my customer ID 2631. That's what I use to hook them together, and we'll see that in the second rule. But notice that I've still got a lot of customer information here, so we'll talk about that in a second. Then order products, the third table. And here's order number 12 again. And notice there's like a double key. We'll go through the structure of each one of these. So there's an auto number here called sequence. And I just call it, you could call it anything. Here's the product code, product name, unit price, and the quantity. Okay, so let's go back and look at our rules for a second. If I shrink this and look at the rules, we've identified 3 one-to-many relationships, and the small tables we won't worry about, but customer, then orders, and then order products. Okay, now that's rule 1. Rule 2, the only duplication should be the hook. So what does that mean? What you're going to find, and we're going to do this in the next video, I'm going to show you how you can visually hook these tables together by the primary keys. If I go back to customer, I've got a primary key here of customer ID. If I go to orders, you'll notice I've got a primary key of order number, but I also have a customer ID. And you can see here's 2631. So I'm going to hook those 2 tables by that primary key. Order products, notice that it has the order number 12. So it duplicates this order number, and you can hook them together by that primary key. Okay, so it says in that rule 2, the only duplication, if I bring it up again, the only duplication should be the hook, which would be the primary key, order number or cust ID. But you can see I'm breaking this rule, and I talk about breaking the rule. Notice that in right here where we are, it breaks the rule really twice. It just has to have the product code, really. It could look up everything else, couldn't it? It just needs the quantity that we ordered. Well, the problem with that, and the good reason why you would break that rule too, is that maybe the product name changes a year from now. You've got an order, and then this ANAQ changes the name. And you don't want the old orders to have the new name. You want them to be preserved exactly as they were when they were ordered. By the same token, you want the unit price that was in effect when you made that order. You don't want this year's new unit price to be duplicated. So what we're doing is we're linking by the product code, but we're bringing in the duplicated, we're duplicating data and leaving it here. You can see the same thing in the orders. If I go to orders, why do I have all this customer stuff here? Okay, for order 12. I've got the company name, all that. What if they move in a year and you've taken an order and then you change the new address? All of a sudden that old order is inaccurate. Okay, it's not indicating where that order was shipped in reality. So you want to duplicate the information, and that's what I mean when, if we go back here, the only duplication should be the hook, the thing you're linking by, ideally the primary key, but there are reasons why you might want to break that rule. And so there's a couple examples there. Then the third and final rule is the data should be as raw as possible. If I come back here to, you can see it in order products, there's no reason why I have to have the total here. Don't need it, because I'll go ahead and calculate the total in the form that we build, and every time I change the quantity, it will go ahead and update that total. Okay, now there may be a time that you want to do that, and you can see if that's true, why would I have an order total over here in the orders? Okay, I did that just to show you an example of maybe you do want to have a subtotal, because if the subtotal is already calculated, then you can do statistics. You can sort on it. You can say, give me all the orders over $1,500, things like that. But if you do that, you've got to have some safeguards, and we will, that it can't be incorrect. And so what you'll find is using the forms, this is a good example of how Access will let you do this, because I cannot change a quantity without it recalculating that subtotal. Okay, so you know it's going to be accurate every single time. Okay, so if I look at the design, if I go to customer and I look at the design, you'll see here is an auto number field for customer ID. It does not matter what that number is. It's just a unique number that you can use to hook to the other tables. Here is in orders, if I go to design, here's the order number is an auto number field. So every time I add a new order, it's going to add a new number, but it also has the customer ID, and we're going to use that in the next video to link those two together. Then in order products, it's a little bit different. Notice in order products, if I go to design, there's a double primary key. The way I did that was I just clicked on the top one when I was in design and dragged down, and then I hit the primary key button to make them both the primary key. And the order number is the number. Okay, it can't be an auto number field. It's the actual order number, and then this sequence is the auto number. Together, those two in combination are always going to be unique, and they have to be for each record. Okay, what you'll find, and this is the beauty of, like if I go back to orders done, we haven't gone into forms. Oh, let me close orders, because it's open in, I'll close all three of these. It's open in design, so it doesn't want to open the form. But when we go to forms, you're going to find that there is such a thing as a subform. We'll go through that in detail. If I add a new record, it's filling in the order number on its own. I don't have to. As a matter of fact, I can't. It will force a number 12 in that third record if I put one in. So the forms take care of that, and that's why you can have, if I go back to order products, that's why you can just have a number here for order number, and the form will fill it in. Okay? So that's the structure that I've done on these three tables. What I want to do in the next video is show you how you can visually link them together and kind of have a roadmap of your database. I'll see you then. Okay, let's go to the next step. I'm going to go ahead and close the all orders table also. And I changed the sort, so it wants to know if I want to change. I wish they would change that. I'm not changing the design. I'm just changing the format of the view of it, and I'll click no. I'm going to go to Database Tools and Relationships. Now, in the first version of this course I did with Access 2016, I really discourage people from using relationships because I don't use them myself. But I've had several years now of interacting with students and other, I'm teaching people how to become a consultant like I was for 30 years. And I found that, people, it does help in the beginning. When you're a consultant like I was, speed is everything. The faster you can make something, the better it is. You know, if somebody wants something, you want to be able to get it done and get it back to them before they forget what they asked for. So relationships just get in my way. I totally depend on forms for everything. And I've had the occasion every once in a while of having a relationship set, and then a year later I come back into a client and I have a problem, and then I realize after a few minutes, oh, it's the relationships. Also, there are many clients that I networked with multiple workstations, and you get into complicated things with relationships. They all have to be in the same, all the tables have to be in the same database. So that's another issue, but I don't think it'll affect you. I would go ahead and click on relationships. It's a good way to get started and to visually see how we're linking these tables together. You have a blank relationships screen. I'm going to right click and select show table. That gives me a show table on the right side, and we know what our three tables are. It's the customer, so I'll double click on that, orders, and order products. Okay, and it has the structure also. You can scroll this up and down. I like to go ahead and put my cursor on the bottom and stretch it down until that scroll bar disappears. So that way it's also a nice list of all the fields. Let me move order products over a little bit. Let me move orders over. Let me bring that down until, again, I've got all of the fields. So we've got customer. Remember, we had customer ID as the primary key. Orders has the order number. Cust ID is what we have to link, so let's go ahead and do that. All we have to do is put our cursor right on Cust ID, click and drag and drop it on the Cust ID on the other side. Now, you have an edit relationships window that pops up when you do that, and you can enforce referential integrity, and you might want to do that because when you're new, and we'll do that with each one of these links. What it means is I can't delete a customer that has orders, okay? And I'll go ahead and click create. And you can see it's got the one-to-many relationship. There's a little infinity sign, which means I can have infinity number of orders for each customer. Now, over here on order products, it's pretty much the same. I don't have the scroll bar, so I know I'm seeing all the fields. And here we have the order number. Let's click and drag it to the order number on this side. And in this case, what I want to enforce referential integrity, I want to be able to delete products potentially. So in this case, I don't want to do that. I might actually delete a record that has the order number on it. Okay, I'm not deleting the order. Okay, and so it just makes a regular link. Now the other thing I've created is a table called products, and I'll show you how to do that when we get to the queries. And it's got a primary key of product code. And here's the product code. So I can click and drag, and actually when we select this, and I can enforce referential integrity here and click create. When we do select this in the form, it's just going to be in a combo box. So it's not going to be another form. And in sales, I'm just doing this so you can see the entire database. I've picked out a list of all the unique salespeople. And here's the salesperson and sales name. Notice, actually, look at that. I've got these little primary key indicators. This shows me that I forgot to make sales name a primary key. Let's do that. I'm going to right click on sales, go to design view, and I forgot to make that the primary key. I'm already on that line, so I'll click on primary key. Now this is not going to work if there are duplications. You can see on the properties at the bottom it says index yes, no duplicates. So I'll click on view and yes, just to make sure. Okay, it automatically alphabetizes it. That works. When I come back, you'll notice it's picked up the fact that there is a primary key there. I can click and drag and drop it on salesperson. And I'm going to enforce referential integrity here. And I'm actually going to do one more step. I haven't referred to these two: cascade update related fields and delete related records. I never use the delete. I don't want to get real efficient at deleting things. And with Access, deleting is really not a problem. I'd rather have something marked inactive than delete it. I can hold years and years of data And if I need to delete something, I do it with VBA code. In the VBA course, you'll learn how to do that. But normally, I don't want to cascade update related fields. Actually, it doesn't matter because these are auto number fields. I'm not changing the order number. I'm never going to change the customer ID number. But look at this example. This is the sales name. If I open sales again, actually, I probably can't do that with this here. Let me close that. Double click sales. It's just the name. Okay, that's the only thing I'm linked by. So if I click on sales name and drag it up here again and enforce referential integrity, this could be pretty handy because if I cascade update related fields, it means that if I change the sales name in sales, it'll change it in all the customer records. Okay, so I'll click create and you'll see it's got the same, since this is the primary key for this table, it knows that's the one side and it goes to the many. If you have somebody that gets married and the name changes, you would just have to change the name in sales and boom, it automatically updates all the customers. So that's kind of handy. Let's go to products, or I've got products, state list. That's the last one. It's a list of states. If I look at it, double click on state list, it's just got the abbreviation and the full name. And notice it in this scenario, I've set it up so each salesperson has a state dedicated to them. And that'll give rise to a few interesting things with combo boxes. So we'll do that later. I'll go ahead and close that. So the state list, I'll click and drag this down here. I'm just going to click and drag and drop it right on the state. Okay, and I'll enforce referential integrity and click create. Actually, I won't. Yeah, I will. Click create. I just won't do any deleted stuff. Now, this is kind of messy. I'm going to go ahead and drag this down, drag this over, maybe bring products like that. What you want to do is make this so that left to right it takes up a minimum amount of space. There you go. Because you can make a report with this that will then, you can print it out and it will then document how your entire database works. Okay, if I just right click here and save the layout. So I can do a relationship report. I can go to design and there is a relationship report. And I might want to go to landscape. There you go. And so I can see the entire thing on the screen. And then I can print that out. And in this case, since I stretched all these boxes out, it's a documentation of not only the relationships, but all the fields. Okay, I'll click on Close Print Preview. And I can close that report. I don't need to save it. And then I can close the relationships. And I'm back to the normal home. Now, one thing that does is since I've got those relationships, let me look at, double click on customer. Notice these little guys here. These just clutter up the screen, and I've already told you I don't want to work in tables because I'm losing most of my power if I do that. But if I click on this, it introduces what's called a sub-data sheet. This is showing all of the orders for this one customer. Okay, and I can do that in reports, I can do it in queries, I can do it in forms very easily with just a button click. So I don't want to do that. What I want to do is to go back to design on this table, and on the right there are properties. Notice on the right it's got sub data sheet name and it's got the word auto there. I want to pull that down and go to none. And then I can click on view and save the table, and that'll be gone. I need to do that for each one of these tables that have these links. Here it is for the orders, and I'll do sub data sheet none and save that. So that's gone. And then I'll do order products. Actually, it's right. Order products is the end of the relationship, so there aren't multiples for that. If I can do sales, let's do it for sales, design, sub-data sheet none, and I'll close it. Okay, there you go. I wanted to add a little postscript to this video. I realized going back over it, it didn't tell you how to delete a relationship, and that can be a problem. What people think usually is that you can just click on the table, because they notice that when you do click on the top of the table, it selects the table, and then hit the delete key, and that's not going to work. You're going to close the relationships, you're going to come back, it's still going to be there. What you need to do is to click on the link itself until it's bold. Make sure you click on it, it's bold, then you can hit the delete key, and that removes the relationship. Then you can click on the table itself and then remove it. Okay, on to the next video. In this section, we're going to go through report basics, and I think you'll find out that whoever designed this was a genius. I mean, it makes so much sense, and it's so controllable. Remember that I said early on when we looked at the four main objects, reports are formatters. They don't hold data themselves. The data passes through from the table and it formats the appearance. So I want to open a couple of reports. There's one called Orders by Date Done. Double click on that and you'll notice that this is a report and it is by date. You can see the dates are all in order. Okay, and it's just got the entire, there's a couple thousand orders there probably. So it just goes on and on and on. So you're in what's called report view. That's what we opened up. If I go up to the views button on the left, remember we've gone back and forth between data sheet and design on tables, back and forth and back and forth. And we'll do that on queries, and we'll do it on forms. And we touched on that in one of the first videos. If I click on the pull down though, remember reports are different. They don't have two, they have four different views. And we are in report view, and it just shows the whole report. Okay, if I go to design view, that's like what we did with the tables. We can go back and forth between report view and design view. But we've got two other views. One of them, if I click on the view tab again, is print preview. And what that does is it shows what one page is going to look like. If I scroll down, notice it gets to the bottom of a page, and I have a page navigator on the bottom, okay, that lets me click one page at a time, little triangle, or I can click the little triangle pointing to the right bar. It'll immediately go to the last page. Big report here, so 122 pages. Okay, so it took a while, and I can go back a page at a time or all the way to the beginning. So that shows you what the page is going to look like. Okay, now let me close print preview. That's what you have. Print preview is unique in that way. You have to close print preview. You don't go back to the views button. But if I go to the fourth and final one, layout view is really nice for people who have struggled to get things on the page right with Excel. This is really nice because it shows you the data and it shows you where you're at with the page size you selected minus the margins, which are 8.5 wide, 8.5 by 11 and ½ inch margins by default, and it shows you the columns. Now notice our company's cut off here. If I click on company, I can put my cursor on the right edge there and I can make this bigger, and I can visually see, okay, well, how big do I have to make it? You know, that's probably big enough. Okay, and likewise, maybe the city needs to be bigger now that I've got some space. So I can make those two adjustments, and I'll get the title over here a little bit. So I've made those two adjustments. Now I can go to view and go to report view, and it looks a lot better. Okay, does that make sense? So 4 views: report view, print preview, layout, and design. Now let's go to design, and there's a lot of stuff in here. There's a lot of little boxes and stuff. I want to cover those boxes in the next video. I want to look at what they do though, and I want to look at them in relation to these headers here, and we've got a couple of footers and something called detail. These are sections of the report, and this is what makes so much sense to me. A report header, we just got an area up here, and you can see where it just says orders. A report header is a section of a report that prints once at the beginning of the report. Then a page header, if I click in the page header, is something that prints on the top of every page. Okay, and likewise page footer prints on the bottom of every page. Report footer is a little bit different, and I'll use an example of that. And notice what they've done. They've just gone to the bottom and they've stretched it out, so there's nothing there. I just went to the very bottom of the title bar here, and I got a double-pronged arrow, and I could drag it down like that. Okay, so report header, page footer, report footer. Now in the middle is detail, and it looks like it just, this says cust ID, this says cust ID. These boxes are a little bit different. They're going to show the contents of the field called cust ID. But this detail section, it prints detail for every single record. So one detail for every record. And all it does, it's a linear program. It starts at the top and says, okay, I'm at the beginning of the report. I'm going to print the report header, page header. Now start printing detail. But remember how big the page is. When you get to the bottom, stop, and then do the page footer, and then go to the next page. Okay, now I'll show you an example of that. If I go ahead and let me click Save, because we've made this little change with the report footer, and I'll go to the Home menu, and I'll click on, let's go to Print Preview, okay? Because with Print Preview, remember, we see each page. Now remember I said the report header is something that prints once at the beginning of the report. Okay, so there's orders, and there's these column titles. If I go to the next page, though, let me click the page advance here. The word orders is not there. Okay, because report header only prints once at the beginning of the report. Well, let's do an experiment. Let me close Print Preview, and I'm in Design. Just like I moved the bottom of the report footer down, I can move the bottom of the page header area down. I've got this little double-pronged arrow. I'm going to click and drag down. I'm just kind of looking at it and seeing. I want to have enough room to have all of these little titles, but I want to have the orders in there also. Okay? Now, I'm going to give you a little preview of a shortcut. I want you to click on the left edge, and I do want you to go through these steps. Go through the video once, then come back through and pause it and do these steps on the database. You click on the left edge, and then it selects everything all the way across. And when you have it selected, if you put your cursor in anything that's selected, you get a double-pronged arrow, 4 points. You can go straight down and let go. And I can also click and hold on orders and just drag it, and it jumps right down into the page header. I can now collapse the report header. I can just drag the bottom of it up. And now what does our report look like? I'm going to hit Save. A good idea to hit Save before you look at the report. I'll go back to, I'm on Home, and I'll go to the View and go to Print Preview. Okay, there's our orders. Looks exactly like before, but now I'll go to the second page. It still says orders, okay, because now it's in the page header. Does that make sense? Okay, now let's go back, click Close Print Preview. Why do I even have a report footer then? Okay, let me show you another little sneak preview here. I want you to click on where it says order total. I want you to click once. It has a little border around it. And remember, next video we'll find out what all these little boxes are. So it's selected. You can do a Control-C to copy. I'm going to click down here in the report footer. Anytime you click in a detail and you're going to paste something, it always pastes in the top left corner. So I'm going to do a Control-V, and it's going to come in right under the words report footer. I can then press the down arrow a couple times just to get it away from the top of that. And I'll just hold the right arrow, and I'll bring this all the way over there, like that. And it's an order total. I might make it a little bit bigger. I'm going to go to the left edge. See this little tiny button? How they've got these little boxes all the way on the corners and all the way halfway through each side. I'm going to put my cursor on that when I get that double arrow. and just make that bigger. Okay? And we'll be doing this again inside the next few videos. What I'm going to do is I'm going to change that. I'm going to go over here to properties. So I'm showing you a lot of stuff ahead of time. So I've clicked on order total. This property sheet, if you don't have it, click on property sheet. Okay? If it's gone, you just click on it and it comes back. And I'm going to put right here where it says order total, I'm going to make this equal sum. That's easy for all the Excel people out there. Equal sum, parentheses, and then I'm going to put in a square bracket there. So equal sum, and then in parentheses, I need to tell it that it's the item, the piece of data, the field called order total, and I do that by surrounding it with square brackets. Okay? If you've got that, it looks perfect. Let's go ahead and save the report, and let's look at print preview again. Okay, now it's not going to look any different because we were just doing the report footer. If I go to the second page, you can see the top looks the same, the bottom of that page looks the same. But if I click on the little arrow pointing into a bar to the right, which goes to the last page, takes a second because it's a big report. Notice what I've got down here. Okay, so report footers are different. Page header on top of every page. Page footer on the bottom of every page. Report footer once at the top, the beginning of the report. Report footer once, not at the end of the report, but at the end of the data in the report. Notice it's above the page footer. But again, that's why these people are geniuses when they figured this out. That's exactly what you want it to do. You want to be able to have a grand total at the bottom. And we'll get into this a little farther, and you'll find that you can do sorts, you can do any kind of subtotaling. It's just amazing what it can do. You can do reports that are just subtotals, get rid of all the detail. So it's amazing when you think you can have as many of these as you want. Okay, if you wanted 150 different reports on your data, that's not a problem to do. Okay, so and at the end we'll string a whole bunch of them together with a macro, and we'll just do like 4 reports with 1 click. Okay, when we're done. So it's easy to do. I'll click close print preview, and so you'll get used to this, but you'll have this report header, page header, detail, page footer, report footer. Those those sections of the report you'll deal with. So in the next video, let's start figuring out what these boxes are and a little more about how they work. Okay, see you then. In this video, I want to use the reports wizard to make a new report. So, and I'm going to do it a couple of times so you can see some differences depending on what you select. I'll click on create on the menu, and then you've got your sections here for each, your groups for each of the major objects. Here's reports, and in the top right corner is report wizard. Okay, now the report wizard we've selected, it's got the orders table selected. I could, if I wanted a different table, pull that down and select any of the tables. But that's what I want, and I've got all the fields here. I want the order number. Notice I've got a right pointing arrow. If I click on that, it copies that over there. And I can do cust ID. A shortcut is just to double click if I do company. Okay, and let's say all I want after that is the order date. And actually it's faster if you're going to select several in a row. I'm going to do order date through order total. I've got the first one selected. I'll just click on the right arrow and it goes down to the next one when I select it. So I just click that 4 times. So I've got my fields here that I want to select. I'll click on next. And because it sees that there is a potential, a customer ID, a primary key, it wants to know if I want to group on that, and I don't. We'll do that later. So I'm going to click this little left pointing arrow to take that away. Then I'll click on next. It also wants to know if I want to sort the records, and we'll do that later. So I'll just click on next without selecting anything. and it wants to know if I want a tabular layout, and that's what reports usually are, is the tabular layout. Columnar, it's hard to read. Justified stretches things across the page. All I ever use is tabular. So click tabular, and we're in portrait. And this is real valuable. Down here on the bottom, it's got a checkbox that says adjust the field width so all the fields fit on the page. And then click next. It's given it the name of our table, orders, and that's fine. It's got preview the report selected, so I'll just click on finish. And there's our report. Doesn't look bad. Okay, it's adjusted everything. Can't quite see all of the name of the order number, but we could fix that up. Okay, so that's pretty good. The problem comes from when you have a lot more fields than that to put on the report, and usually you do. So stay right there and let me go ahead and do another report. I'm going to close Print Preview, and I'm going to go back to the Create menu, and I'm going to go through this sequence again. I'm going to go to Report Wizard, and let's say I want order number and cust ID company, the names, the address, the city, and then I want the order date, subtotal, freight, and total. So I've got a lot more width here, okay? I'll click on next, and once again, I won't do the grouping. I won't do the sorting, so I'll just click on next. Everything is the same. Adjust the width to fit on a page, and it just can't do it. If I preview, it's going to name it orders 1 because I already have an orders report. And so I'll click finish to preview, and it's just too much. It can't do it. Notice what it's done. It's way off the page on the right, and it's like kind of like Excel at that point. If I click on close print preview and I look at, if I go to the views, pull down, and I go to design, you can see that this thing on the bottom, I've got a scroll bar. I can scroll to the right. This report is like 22 inches wide, so that's fairly worthless, and I'd have a lot of work to get that back to where I wanted it to be. Okay, so I don't want that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to close that. Down here, actually, it saves orders 1 on the bottom left corner. I'm just going to highlight that and hit delete. Okay, and so that leaves us on our original orders. So what if we did want to put the customer name and the address, meaning city, address and city on the bottom, like we did in that one you saw earlier? Here's what we could do. We already know, you've probably figured out from the previous video, that I can put my cursor on the bottom of the detail area and get a double pronged arrow up and down. And when I have that, I can click and hold and drag down and then let go. And so I've made the detail area bigger. Okay. Now, one of the things that I'm doing, I'm stalling on you a little bit. I'm stalling on explaining everything about the property sheet. I don't know if you've looked at the curriculum, but a couple of sections from now, after we go through the reports and after we go through the queries, there's a whole section just on properties, okay? But it's unavoidable. I've already used it. I used it in the last video. What you'll find is properties, it's amazing how you can have thousands of choices, but they found a way to keep them off the screen until you need them. And that's what properties are. The properties are context sensitive to what you have selected. So we'll go through that in detail. But at this point, I just want to point out a couple of things about the properties of this report. First one is, okay, here's property sheet on the right. It says property of the report. It's got a tab called all, so that makes sense. It's all the properties. But notice the very top property is always record source. What is the source of the records that are going to be in this report? And notice the record source is not just these fields I selected. It's the table called orders. And so that means all the other fields should still be here to be selected from. And that's true. Up here on the top, right next to property sheet, is add existing fields. If I click on that and I'm in the design menu, notice I got report design tools up here. I forgot to mention that, but you got 4 report design tools. This is the one you'll use most of the time. Design, and add existing fields shows me a list of all the fields. Okay, now let's say we wanted first name, last name, address, city in there. If I click on first name, I can click and drag and drop it, and it drops it in just like that. And what this does is this gives me an opportunity to go over what these boxes are and a couple of things that we can do with this and the properties to make this report give out a lot of information with a minimum amount of space. Okay, all these boxes up here on the top where it says orders, this thing where it says now, all of these things together on this report are called controls. So in the last video we went over sections, report headers, footers, detail, those are sections. In the sections you put controls. And the controls are several different types. Like anything in Access, there's a few you use all the time and some that you use a lot less. Notice up here on the ribbon for design, it says controls. There's a controls group. And the control I've got selected is just my select arrow. Okay. What I can do is I can select something and then I can go back to just having my select arrow by just clicking on this arrow on the left. So let me go through them. Text box is the one you'll use the most. A text box is, this is an example, this first name is an example of a text box control. It ties to some field on the table, on the record source, and it shows you the contents of that. So it's not going to say fname, it's just going to show you the contents of fname. Now notice when I brought that in, it also brought in another box that says fname. If I click on that, if I go back to properties, remember I said properties are context sensitive. If I click on the property sheet, notice what it says. It says selection type label. If I click back on the first one, it says selection type text box. So now we have a label, and that's the second control here too. If I put my cursor on it, a label. All a label does is it prints out the text in the box. So orders up here, if I click on that, that's a label. Notice what Access does, incidentally. When you use the wizard or if you're adding things, it automatically, it has to have a name, a unique name for every control. And so it gives it a name that is comprised of the control type and then just a number. It just numbers all the controls. So this one is label 14. If I click on the company, that's company label. Okay. If I click, well, any of these, it's going to be the same. And then if I click on the control, excuse me, if I click on the text box, it makes the name of the text box the same as the control source. Okay, so this one is going to be called fname and fname. Fname is the control source. That's where the data is going to come from on the properties. And the name of the control is also the same. I'm going to emphasize that a lot through the class because people get into trouble because they don't, if they add these things in, they sometimes get the names separated from the control source. Okay, so far so good. Now, what are these this little highlighting? If I click out here in a blank area, it takes the highlighting away. If I click on it, it brings this highlighting back, and it's got little tiny boxes in the corner and halfway through each side. Okay, and then it's got a bigger box in the top left corner. What that bigger box does, and notice that the label does too. When I bring in a field, a field like fname, it brings in its own text box and a label. And this little box on the top left lets me move that individually. If I just clicked and dragged the label by itself, notice that the label, or excuse me, the text box by itself, notice that the label goes with it. Okay, so this lets me move it independently. Okay, I might want to put it like right there and maybe make it, click on it, make it bigger, and then maybe call it first name. Okay, you can do that. So when you have something selected, it's going to be highlighted like that, and it's going to have these little, they call them sizing boxes, halfway through the side and also in the corners. Okay, you'll use the ones on the left and right most of the time because usually you're not changing the height, you're changing the width. All right, now One of the nice things about reports is that you can select multiple controls at once, and just about all this we're talking about with controls transfers directly to forms also. I can click on order total, but then I can hold shift and I can click on freight. I can click on subtotal. If I wanted to format all three of those at the same time with a common format, I could do that. One even better way is if I click in a blank area. You've already seen if I click in a blank area, it unselects everything. But if I click in a blank area and then start dragging, and see this little rectangle? If I drag it so that it touches things, when I let go, everything that I touch is selected. So if I need to move several things, delete several things, or even make them narrower, if I want to make them narrower, notice how they're all getting narrow. That's a good way to do that. And then the ultimate shortcut you've already seen, that's the rulers. You've got a ruler on the top that shows that here's the 8 inches of width we've got. And I did mention, incidentally, 1/2 inch margins. If we go to print preview, there's the margins up here in print preview. They're 1/4 inch margins, not half. Okay, that's the default. Okay, let me go back and close print preview. You've already seen that we can click in the ruler and it'll select everything across. You can also click on the top. If I clicked on the top, it would select everything straight down. Now, if I wanted to select those two things, this label and this order number text box underneath it, I could do that, but I've got these things selected too. I can use shift to unselect. So if I hold shift and then click on orders and then click on this box on the bottom, it unselects those. So after a while, you get pretty good with moving stuff around, selecting, sizing. It's pretty flexible. Now, what makes it even more flexible is that when you have a text box, you're not limited to just putting a field in there as a control source. That's where you start. But do you remember what the orders done looked like? It didn't have, actually, I'll just double click on it. It didn't have the first name and then the last name. It had them both together. Okay, that makes sense. And it had the address and then a comma and a space and the city. And that's what you're going to want to do. So what we can do is I'll click and drag first name over here like this, and let me move it up a little bit. And maybe I just want to make this called name. So I clicked on it. Now I've got a little I-beam cursor just to the left of the N in name. I'm going to click and drag, and I'll hit delete. So now it's just name. Actually, let me do that again. I'm going to click on it once to select it, and then click at the end to get an I-beam cursor, a little text box, text cursor, and I'll put a colon at the end. Then I can click off of it. Let's write justify it. So I'll click on that once again, and I'll go to home on the menu, and there's write justify on the home, because all your text controls are on the home, right side of the home ribbon. Okay, so that looks pretty good. But now click on this F name. Let's make it bigger. I'm going to get a double arrow on the right side, and maybe I bring it all the way out so it's just as wide as the company. Then what I'm going to do is click in the control source over here on the properties. And if I pull this down, you can see there's a field called F name. I like to keep field names as short as possible, no spaces. F name for first name, L name for last name. What I'm going to do instead of selecting one of those is I'm just going to put in a formula. Equals, and then square brackets, and I can hold shift and press F2. Shift F2 is called the zoom box, and all it does is it lets you make things larger. We'll use this in queries a lot when we start doing formulas in queries. So I want this to be equal square brackets F name and then close square brackets. That means I'm referring to the field called F name. And do you remember concatenation in Excel? You might have concatenated some text fields together. You always use the ampersand to do that. You just hook them together with that. And in this case, I want to hook together a space. So I just put in double quotes and a space and double quotes, And then I put in another hook, another ampersand, and I put in square brackets last name, and the name is L name. You've got to spell these correctly or it's not going to work. It'll give you an error. But that's one of the nice things about having your printout that we talked about in the last video, is you can make sure of the spelling of the name. So equals F name and a space and then and L name. I'll press enter. Oop, I don't need to press enter, excuse me. I'll click OK. That puts that into the control source property. And now here's a real gotcha. People do this all the time. The problem with this is it's still called F name. Okay? You need to name it something else, something that is not a field name. I'll just call it full name. Okay, so now we've named our control full name, and it's got the name in it. Let's check and see what this looks like. I'll click on View and Print Preview. Actually, Report View. Either one of them would work. Okay, there you go. It's got the first name, a space, and the last name. It's got this irritating border around it. We'll get rid of that. I'll click Close Print Preview. Let's get rid of that border. We've still got that selected. So this whole properties box over here is the properties of this thing we have selected. I'll go to Format, Border. There it is, Border Style, Solid. Let's pull that down. This is the other thing about properties, is when you click on something, it gives you the choices. So I pull that down and go Transparent. If I now go to View and Print Preview, for instance, that's gone. Okay, the border is gone. So that's easy enough. Let's do the same thing with the address in the city. As a matter of fact, I'm just going to click on this, and I'm just going to copy it with a Control-C, and then I'm going to click in a blank area. Remember what I told you about pasting? If you don't have anything selected, it always comes in at the top left, doesn't it? Control-V comes in at the top left. I can use the down arrow to get exactly in line with the first thing I put in there. And I'll bring this over here. I can click on name once, the label, then I can double click and it highlights the word name. I'll put in address. And let me go back to my all. I want to make sure I have the spelling right, because we need the address, a comma space, and city. Okay, I'm going to go back to all on the all tab on the properties, and I'm going to click in this control source and pull down. And again, if you had your printed out list of field names, that would help. So it's called city, okay, and I've abbreviated, like I do a lot. Address, I've abbreviated ADDR. Mostly that's because I program a lot, and you get really tired of typing long field names. So if you're in the habit of doing that, then you learn to program, you're going to find that's a habit you want to get out of. You want to make them as short as possible. So I can just edit this. I can click in here, and I can make this first one city. Then I've got, I don't want just a space. I want a comma there. Okay, we're going to concatenate a comma and a space. Or excuse me. This is address, ADDR. There we go. And then a comma and a space. And then city. Good. Looks good. And we might make that bigger. So I'll click off of it. Then I can click again to select it. Get the little cursor at the right edge. Get the double arrow, drag it all the way to the right. Okay? Starting to look like something. So we can click on View and Report View. Okay, so that looks really good. Now I'll go back to design. One other thing that Orders Done had was a nice line underneath. And we haven't paid attention to the controls up here after we looked at the first two. The text box and the label. The next one is a button. We'll do those later. You got all kinds of things, tab controls, option groups, things like that. Most of these you will not use that often. There's some that you'll use more on a form than you will on a report. But one you'll use on a report a lot is the line control. So if I click on that, when I move my cursor down here, notice I've now got the line control as my cursor. Now I could click and drag, and if I'm not perfect, it'll have a jagged line. What you want to do is hold shift. Here's what I do is I hold shift and click and drag a little bit and let go. It forces, and then I'll let go of shift. It forces a flat line. Okay, so that works pretty good. And I'll just move it up one line. So why did I make it so small? Well, that's because I've got properties. I know this thing's 8 inches wide, this whole layout. So look at the properties. Here's a property of my line called left. I can highlight that and put in a 0 and press enter, and that means the left edge of that is now 0. And let's see, here's width. Let's type in an 8 and press enter, and now it's 8 inches wide. It goes all the way across the page. Okay, notice down below here is hairline, and again, this is a second example of seeing the options on a pull down. I find that 2-point looks pretty good. Actually, 1-point might work better. 2-point works good on a top on the header. And I'm going to drag up the bottom just a little bit. Now I'll click save, and let's see what that looks like. So I'll go to view and report view. That looks great because you got your line, you've got your alternating colors. We'll talk about that when we get into properties. But then you got your line after each section. Let's do one more, and I think we'll be done. I want to put a 2-point line right under the title on the top. So we'll go back to design view. What I'm going to do, I still have that selected. I'm just going to do a Control-C to copy that line. I'll click in the blank area of the page header. And then again, when you paste, they come into the top left. So I did a Control-V, there it is on the top left. So I know it's at 0. I can press the down arrow. I'll just bring it down here, right under my titles, maybe up one, just like that. And then I can change this 1 point to a 2-point. And now let's look at the report. So you can see it's a little heavier border, and you got your 1-point line in between the records. Okay, go back to design and save that. And I think order number needs to be fixed, so I'll make that a little bit bigger. There we go. Okay, so we've got a report. We'll be going back through reports in a lot of detail. In the advanced section, we'll do the sorting, and we'll do the grouping, and we'll do the subtotaling and all of that kind of stuff. And I'll go through how to do these pages on the bottom and what this now is. It's just a formula for the date, but we'll do that. So that's enough to start. That's the basics of reports. Let's go through the basics of queries, and then we'll be on after that into properties. So I'll see you then. In this section, we'll go over queries, and usually people have a lot of fun with this. When I was teaching in-person courses, classes, all-day classes, a lot of times everybody would have so much fun in the query section, I had to really push to get them to go on to the next section. So queries are fascinating, and it gives you a sense of power because it doesn't matter if you've got tens of thousands of records. You can do things with them, pull out copies, and look at whatever you want to look at just in a few seconds. It's very effective. Now, one thing before I dive in with that, remember that the way we're structuring this course is we're going to go through the basics of the objects. And so you may be really looking at, well, what does that do? What does that do on tables or reports? And then I leave and go to the next thing. Just hang with me because it's going to make more sense if we can go all the way through. I want you to get all the way through. We're going to go through queries, and then we're going to go into properties, and then we're going to go into forms. We do properties first because you really can't use forms without using properties a lot. And I want you to have the basics of all of those objects and the properties. Then we'll go back through and pick up all the advanced stuff. So be patient. It's going to make more sense that way. A lot of people will go too far into tables or reports, and then they get totally confused when they get to the rest of the stuff. I want you to have a foundation first, then we'll kind of spread out from there. Now, queries, let's go in and make a query. I'm going to go to Create, I almost never use the query wizard. It's too easy to just go to the query design. And what you have is a two-part structure here. I'm going to drag this up. Notice I've got a double prong arrow here, so we can kind of zoom in on the video and see both parts. And I've got a property sheet. I'm going to close that here on the right. And then I've got another panel here called Add Tables. So the way this works is when you open a query, it wants to know what are you going to base it on? What tables are you going to base it on? And I'll just use orders. I'll double click orders, and then I'll close that panel. On the top right corner, there's an X. So notice what it does. It brings up, I can stretch this list down. It brings up the a box with orders, and it shows all the fields. And that's so that you can select the fields and put them in this bottom structure down here, this bottom grid. Notice there's no column titles on them, but there are row titles. The first one says field, and then it says table, sort, show, criteria, and or, and we're going to do all of those. Okay, so let's say we wanted to know the city. If I click on city and hold up here in this top structure, so I'm holding my mouse button down, I'll drag down. Notice I've got a little circle with a slash, still have a circle with a slash. That means I can't stop here. So I go down here, and now it becomes a little plus. That means I can let go of my mouse button, and I'll do that. And it copies the city name into the field, and notice it puts orders into the table also. That's important because later on you're going to find we can do queries on multiple tables, and so you need to know which table things are from. That's especially important if you have the same name field in two different tables. Now, let's go ahead and remember we've gone back and forth between design and viewing the result. You do that more here than just about anywhere. I'm going to go up to the menu up on the top, and I'm in a Query Tools menu on Design, and I've got the View pulled down. I also have it if I go to Home. It's there also. So I'll go ahead back to Design, and I can click on the data sheet, and it shows all of those values for the city. Notice on the very bottom, I've got almost 4,500 records. And I do that deliberately so that we'll have a lot of stuff to work with. It's a more realistic exercise in using queries. I'll go back to Design. Okay, right, I just click where I click for the data sheet, and I come back. Now, let's say we also want the state. Okay, I'll double click on state. That's a shortcut. It's the same thing as dragging it down. It's just a little bit faster. And if I click on the data sheet again, you can see now I've got the city and the state. Okay, now let me go back. Let's use this next row here called sort. If I click on sort, there's a little pull down, and it's ascending, descending, or not sorted. So ascending would be A to Z. That's what I want. I'll click on that, and then I'll click on the data sheet. So now it's sorted by the city. Okay, now what I'd really like is to see the state alphabetically, and then the city. So let's try that. I'll go back to Design, and let's change the state to ascending. So now we've got an ascending sort in both of these. Let's look at the result. Hasn't changed a bit. It's exactly the same. Okay, and the reason is, if I go back to Design, the reason is that in the queries, it always sorts left to right. Okay, it sorts left to right. If I want to sort by the state first, what I have to do is have that column first. So can we move it over there? Let's try this. If you put your cursor right at the very top of the column, do you see a little black arrow pointing down right over state? When you get that arrow, if you click, it will select that whole column. And then if you move your cursor back, notice it's now a white arrow leaning towards the left. If I click and hold, see that bar on the left side? I can now drag, and it just jumps to the left of city if I let go. So now it's by city, or excuse me, by state first and then city. And if I look at the data sheet, there you go. So it's sorted by state, then city. Now, what if you don't want that? What if you want it sorted that way, but you don't want state to be the first field? You want it to be like we had it before, city and then state. You can do that. Click on design, and what I'll do is I'll double click on state. Now that puts it in a second time. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this appear in the query grid and take away the first one. That's the next row. So we've done field, table, and sort. The next row is show, and automatically, by default, all those checkboxes for show are checked for any fields you add to the query. I'm going to uncheck it, and let's take a look at the result. So by unchecking it, it's still doing the sort. Notice we're sorted by Alaska first. It just doesn't show. And if we didn't have that second state column, you wouldn't see any state at all, okay? So I'll click on design. It would just be an alphabetical list of cities by state. So that's pretty straightforward. One additional thing, if we double click on freight, one additional thing to realize about sorting is what happens if something is blank. Now I know there's a couple records out there with no freight. What I'm going to do is I'm going to select this first state, and actually I don't need to sort by state, so I'm just going to delete this column. I'll click on the pull down, or excuse me, on the black arrow above this first state, and I'll just hit delete, and then I'm going to change this to not sorted for the city, so there is no sort now. And what I'm going to do is change the freight so that it is ascending. Now let's look at the result. Okay, so the reason I did this is I want you to realize that when you do sort, blanks, just about everywhere in computer programs, always sort to the top. Okay, they come first if you're sorting. Now, let's go back. Let's say I wanted subtotal. Another thing to realize about the sort, incidentally, if I click over here and I just pressed enter to go across, I could just hit delete to get rid of that sort. What if we want to sort, we want the biggest subtotals? I'll click on descending and then click view. And now I've got the largest orders in the system, okay? So it's pretty powerful. This is just, we're scratching the surface on queries. So what we'll do next time is, instead of showing, if I go back to the data sheet, every single time we've done this, we've had all 4,494 records. In the next video, we'll go through criteria, how you select only some of the records in combination with everything else we've learned. Okay, I'll see you then. So now let's add criteria to our query. I'm going to go back to design, and why don't we start with just the city and state fields. I'm going to remove the freight and subtotal. I'll just get the down arrow above freight. I'll click and hold and drag to the right to subtotal. And with both of them highlighted, I've let go of the mouse. Now I can hit the delete key, and it knocks both of those out of there. Now let's say we wanted Las Vegas for the city. Las Vegas. Okay, so I just type that in and I press enter. Now capitals don't matter with criterias, so we will get it even though it's capitalized. But notice what happened when I pressed enter. It put quotes around it. So when you're using text in criteria, it's always going to put quotes around that text. Now let's take a look at the result. Okay, all I've got is 30 records, the ones from Las Vegas. Okay, let me go back. Let's say you knew it was Las something, but you weren't sure if it was Las Vegas or something else. Let's try this. Las, and notice I highlighted that first, so when I typed it, wiped it out. So I'm just going to type LAS asterisk, and I'll press enter. Watch what happens when I press enter to go to the next cell. I've entered what's called a wildcard. That asterisk literally means any characters or no characters. So what we're telling Access is we want cities that start with LAS, then have anything or nothing. Could just have LAS in the field. And it recognizes that, and it puts the word like in the front, like space, then in quotes, LAS asterisk. Okay, so it does that for us. If I click on the results on the data sheet, now I've got Las Cruces also. Okay, now go back to design. Let's say that's wrong. It had LAS somewhere in the name. Now I've highlighted it, and I'll press delete to get rid of it. I can put in asterisk LAS asterisk and press enter, and it'll do the same thing. It's like space and then in quotes asterisk LAS asterisk. If I click on the result, okay, there's Las Vegas, Las Cruces, like I had before. But notice it's got Dallas also. Remember I said any characters or no characters? Dallas has LAS and nothing. So that qualifies. Notice down here, let's see, Pinellas Park. It's got an LAS in the middle of the name. Okay, anything that has an LAS anywhere. Here's North Las Vegas. And that is what you'll usually use. If I go back to design, about 95% of the time, if you're using a wildcard, you're going to use that asterisk. Now, let's say we weren't sure it was LAS. Maybe it's LOS. And we wanted to get both the LASs and the LOSs. I'll press the left arrow to go back so that when I type, it'll wipe out what's there. Let's try this. I'm going to do L, and then I'm going to put in a question mark, and then an S, and an asterisk. Okay, so what I'm saying is it's got to start with L. The question mark is your only other wildcard that you'll use. It's a wildcard for one character position. So literally what I'm saying is I want things that in the city start with an L, can have any letters. The second letter, they got to have S as the third letter, then they can have anything else, okay, with the asterisk. I'll press enter, and you'll see it puts the like in the front. Okay, let's take a look. Okay, Los Angeles has popped in. Notice all these qualify. L with the first letter, S with the third letter, and then anything else. Okay, and if I wanted that L space and then an S anywhere inside, I could edit this. I'm going to put my cursor on it, and I'm going to use something I use every once in a while. I think I've used it once already. It's called the zoom box. It's a little tight to see in there exactly where my cursor is, so I can hold the shift key once I've clicked in there, shift and F2, and all the zoom box does is it just blows up what you're typing so you can see it a little bit better. What I can do is move over here to the just to the right of the quote mark, and I can put an asterisk in here. So now what I'm saying is any characters or no characters, then L something S, then anything else. Okay? Now click OK. We'll look at our result. Okay, interesting. Notice Flushing is there because it's got an L something S in it. A lot of cities qualified. So you don't use the question mark as often, but you'll usually use the asterisk, but it can be valuable. Now you can use these in combination. If I just wanted states, let's see what kind of states we've got here. We've got, there's some that start with N. Let's say we just wanted states that start with the letter N. I could put an N asterisk in the state, and now I've got a double criteria, one in the city and one in the state. Okay, so far so good. Now let's take, I want to break these up into several videos so you can refer to them later. So in the next video, we're going to go into date criteria and also use a keyword called between. So we'll do that in the next video. I'll see you then. Okay, next step, let's add to our query. I'll go back to design. Now I've got a date field, order date. I'm going to double click on that to add that to our grid, and I'm going to double click on subtotal. What I'm going to do is remove the criteria here completely, and we'll put in new criteria for the date fields and then look at the, actually I'll start with subtotal. Now, you could go and highlight each one of these two and remove them with the delete key. A quick way to do the entire row, though, is to go to the left edge over by the word criteria. And when you're on the very left, notice you get that black arrow again. This time it's pointing to the right. Now I have that on that first criteria line. If I click on the arrow, or if I click on the mouse, it highlights the whole thing. I can hit delete, and it knocks that whole row out. Okay. Now I'm going to click on, let's see, subtotal, and let's say we only want orders that are greater than or equal to $10,000. So greater than, you just hold shift and use the greater than arrow, and then the equal sign. 10, you don't put commas in, because that's a format. Comma is a thousands formatter. You just put in the actual number. So greater than or equal to 10,000. Let's look at the result. Okay, everything there is greater than or equal to. Let's go back to design and put those in descending order. So now we'll see the biggest order. Okay, that looks good. All right, now let's say we only wanted orders for this year, January 1 and on up of 2000. I've got a couple of 2020 orders here. Let me go back to design. You can do the same thing with a greater than or equal to. Greater than equal to 1/1/21, and I'll press enter. Now notice that the greater than equal, the 10,000 doesn't have any quotes around it like our text did. Watch what happens to the date, because Access analyzes this criteria and it knows this is for a date field. So I'm going to press enter. It puts pound signs around it. Pound signs are up above, there they are, up above the 3 in the typewriter section. You hold the shift and get a pound sign. So pounds are surrounding dates, and it wouldn't do that if that wasn't a valid date either. It'll give you an error when you run it. Okay, let's try it. So greater than January 1, greater than or equal to January 1 of 2021, and greater than or equal to 10,000. Okay, you'll notice those 2020 orders disappeared. Okay? Now, let me go back. Let's say, let's get rid of the, let's only have January, nothing else. So to make this also less than equal to 1/31/2021, I'll press the left arrow. Easiest thing is just to put in the whole thing all over again. I'll do greater than equal to 1/1/21, and then I can put in a space and then a space, less than equal to 1/31/21. And when I press enter, okay, it puts the pound signs in there. I'm going to go back and do a shift F2. I used the left arrow to go back, and now the zoom box shows you the entire detail there. Okay, let's take a look at our results. There we go. So that's just for January. Now there's a much easier way to do that. What I'm going to do is press F2 to highlight that entire criteria, and then I'll hit delete to get rid of it. And I'm going to put in the word between space 1/1/21 and 1/31/21. That is exactly the same thing. I press enter. It's got the pound signs in there. It is the equivalent of saying greater than equal to 1/1 and less than or equal to 1/31. Okay? So I will look at the results. It's just easier to type it in, between value and value. The only time where you would not want to use that is if you're doing greater than or equal to some value and only less than another value. And in that case, you just use the math notation of just less than, and you wouldn't put in the equal sign. Okay, I'll go back to design. That is between. In the next video, we'll take the next step with criteria and look at how you do or and what the difference between or and criteria is. I'll see you then. Okay, let's go into the difference between and or criteria. I'm going to go back to the result, and let's see, we've got January orders over 10,000. We've got a lot from California, let's say I just wanted California. I've got a couple. Ultimately, I want to have West Coast. Here's a couple from Washington also. So let me go back to design, and in the state, I'll just type a CA and press enter, and you know what that does. It puts the exact match quotes around it. So if I look at the results, okay, there's California. So what if you had the situation where you had the criteria for the date, you had the criteria for the subtotal, but you want to see both California and Washington? Okay, you go back to design, and what I'm going to do is just delete what's there. I'll put in CA space or space WA. Now it's flashing up. It doesn't know but what you want to put some criteria in there that are functions or pieces of other fields and things like that. So that's what those little lists are. We'll use those later on. But for right now, we're going to put in literal values on our own. Watch what happens when I press enter. It'll recognize that word or as connecting two different criteria. So it's saying California or Washington. The important thing about that on this line is that that means all the other criteria hold. Okay, so it's only going to show me Washington also for January and also greater than 10,000. Let's look at the results, and there they are. Okay, so they're in January, they're greater than 10,000. Now, if I go back, what if somebody said, you know, we don't want that, I'm just going to click below that criteria so I can just move my up arrow, use my up arrow to move up, and then I'll type California, CA, and press the down arrow. So I'm back where I was a minute ago. Notice that this whole line is called OR, and then there's a bunch of blank lines. These are all OR rows. What they are is entirely separate criteria rows. So everything we've done so far is on this one row. This means that you can have as many rows as you want, each one of them independent, and they will add to the result, and automatically there will not be any duplication. Okay? So you could have California greater than 10,000, you could have California less than 5,000, and it would add them all together. In this case, I'm just going to type WA in the state, so it's a different way to do OR, but this time I should get all Washington because there isn't any other criteria. So let's check it. Go to the data sheet. Okay, look at all these Washingtons. They're all different dates, they're all different sizes, under 10,000. Does that make sense? So if we go back and look at that again, we're saying give me all the Californias in January greater than 10,000 or anything from Washington. Okay, if we added Illinois, we could do that, and we get, okay, there's some Illinois. Let's say we wanted Illinois, but also greater than or equal 10,000. And Washington, we wanted greater than equal 7,500. Okay, and let's say we wanted, well, I don't know if I have any Illinois in January. Let's find out. So I've got those criterias. Okay, does that match? So here's Illinois over 10,000. Here's some Washingtons over 7,500. Okay, so if I go back to design, this is pretty powerful stuff because you can add as many rows as you want of criteria and it all works together. And again, if you want to remove, if I want to remove those last two rows, I just get my little arrow on the left edge here that's pointing to the right, click and hold, and I'm holding the mouse button down. I'll drag down one more. Now I can hit the delete key, and I've removed those entire rows. Now, did you notice we got blank space down here? Okay, eventually, you know, I could, if I get back here, you know, I could run out of rows. That's why right here you want to be able to insert rows. So if I insert a row, say I'm just inserting rows, so you can just put them back using that insert rows on the query setup. Okay, you don't use it very often. Okay, so we've done a lot with queries. One more thing, in the next video we're going to find out about something called a parameter query. So I'll see you then. Okay, in this video we're going to go through parameter queries, and also I haven't referred to the asterisk in showing all the fields. Why don't we go ahead and do that first. I've had the list up here of all the fields. Notice on the very top there's an asterisk. That's not a wildcard. What it means is all the fields. Okay, so if I let me just double click on asterisk, and I'm adding that to the list. What happens when I go to the result? Notice what it's done. It's got all, here's order number, cust ID, the entire bunch of fields, but it's got to put a qualifier on these first ones because they're in here 2 times. See, here's order city, and then here's city is now called something like field 0, field 1 for state. So what you want to do, if I go back to design, and let me move the asterisk to the left. I just like to have it on the left, so I'll click with the little down arrow, click and hold and drag it over there. So if you're using the asterisk, just unshow the other fields. Actually, I don't need city unless I'm using a criteria for it. State, I've got a criteria, order date, subtotal. These criteria will work exactly the same way. They just won't show a second time. They're showing inside the orders dot asterisk, all the fields. I'll click on data sheet. There you go. So that cleans that up. So you can run queries and show all the fields, or you can just select the fields you want to show, but that doesn't stop you. In either case, you can indicate criteria for individual fields. Now, let's try this. I'm going to wipe out California here, and let's put in a parameter. And I'll actually start in the zoom box. I'll do Shift F2. I'm going to use the square bracket. So find the square brackets. You don't need Shift. It's just above and to the left of the Enter key usually. I'm just going to put in a question or a prompt. I'm going to put in square brackets, enter state. And then I'm going to close my square brackets. Okay, that is what's called a parameter. So I'm going to click OK. Just to make sure it's all right, I'm going to press enter, because if something was wrong with it, like if I left off the square bracket or used a curly bracket, it would give me an error. Let me do that just so you can see. If I took that off, clicked OK, pressed enter, see, it says there's something wrong with it. So you always want to press enter just to confirm that Access understands what you're doing. So now I've just got a prompt, enter state. So let's look at the data sheet, and it says enter state. Now I'll put in Illinois, IL. I've got 1 record. I'll go back to design and then immediately back to the data sheet, WA for Washington. Okay, 2 records. And then I'll try it again for California, CA, and press enter. So parameter queries are great because you can do the same. You can actually perfect your query with real values, putting in the real states and things like that. Just check them out. And then just replace the criteria with these little square bracket prompts. Now what makes it even more powerful is that you can do that inside your other criteria with greater than, less than, and between. Let's try it over here. I'll click at the end. Excuse me, I'll click at the end of the criteria for the subtotal, and I'll do a Shift F2 to go to zoom. And let's just wipe out that value, and I'll just say enter subtotal amount. And you can put in all kinds of other things. Let's say no commas in parentheses, and then don't need to press enter, that just goes to a next line in the zoom box. So I've entered that. I'll click OK, and I'll press enter. Okay, it accepts that. Let's try it. So I'll do California. Enter subtotal amount, no commas. There you go. Let's say 13,500, and I'll press enter. There you go. Okay, I'll go back. Let's try a more complex one. Let's click on the between for the dates and do a Shift F2 to go to zoom. And let's just replace each date. So I've just put my cursor right on the date, and I'm holding the shift key and pressing the right arrow to highlight it, because I know as soon as I start typing, it's going to wipe out what I've highlighted. So I do left bracket, enter, start, date, okay, and close my square brackets. Do the same thing over here, and enter, end, date, close my square brackets, click OK, press enter. Oh, it didn't like that. What you'll find is it wants to evaluate the parameter itself and then put in the pound signs. So what you need to do is go back and take those pound signs out, which is great because it makes it more readable. There you go. So between and then your square brackets, enter start date and enter end date. Click OK. Press enter again. Okay, so we know it's okay. So now it should ask us 4 questions: state, start date, end date, and the subtotal amount. So the state, we'll do California. We got most of those. Start date, let's say 2/1/21. End date is 2/15/21. $5,000. Okay, we don't have any. So that's what happens if you put in a criteria and nothing qualifies. Let me go back. Try that again. I'm going to do January this time. Let's see, 1/1/21, 1/31/21, because I know I have some of those, and we'll do 12,500. There we go. Okay. So that's pretty powerful. Now, I've broken up these. This is five videos we've got on queries, and we'll be back for advanced queries. You're going to find out this is just the beginning. But I wanted to break these up, even though some of them are a little short, so that you can go back and refer to in the curriculum of the course and find the individual pieces. If you think, well, what was that wild card again, or how did he do that between? You can come back and find them. One thing I did want to bring up, if I go back to design, one of the incredible things about this whole query system is this is a visual system to really build something called an SQL statement. Have you noticed that if I go to the pull down, we've just been clicking on the button here, going back and forth between design and the data sheet, but if I click on the pull down, there's a third selection there. See that? I've got data sheet and design and something called SQL. Let me click on SQL, and good grief, what is this? Okay, this is structured query language, SQL. Select orders, dot star, from orders. It kind of makes sense. So select all the fields from orders, and then it's got a criteria statement. If you ever put a criteria in, it always starts with the word where. But who knows how to do, look at all the parentheses and all this stuff. And okay, I never try and type in an SQL statement. I let the query do it for me, okay, because I can never get the parentheses right and don't need to worry about it because it'll do it for you. And then if I do a sort, notice it's got an order by, okay, and DESC means descending. And then, very important, all SQL statements end with a semicolon. Okay, now the reason I bring this up, you'll probably never do an SQL statement like this, but what you'll find is as we go along, you'll be, let me go back to design. I don't want to go back and run the query again. As you create combo boxes, things like that, you'll have row sources. You could have record sources for forms and things like that. When you have those in the properties, they're going to be in the form of an SQL statement. So Access is really good at taking an SQL statement and then showing it to you in the query format, the visual format, then converting it back. So very powerful stuff. Okay, the queries are a lot of fun, but again, we're just scratching the surface. These are what's called select queries, and we will, when we come back around and come through queries, in the advanced sections, notice up here, everything we've been doing is just one kind of query, select, that just gives you a copy of the result. There's a whole bunch more queries out there. So I will see you in the next section. See you then. Okay, we're finally ready to dive into forms. I'm still sitting on my orders report mess. Let me save that, close it, and we'll create a form. I'm going to go to Create and Form Wizard. I never used the Form Wizard, but I want to show you why. And we'll do forms manually, a lot of forms. So this first time through, we'll just use the Form Wizard. Now I'm going to pick the orders table. And this looks a lot like the report wizard, where you can click on the right pointing arrow to select one field, or two arrows to select them all. That's what I want to do. Click on the double arrow, select all the fields, and go to next. Now we had, if I click on tabular, that looks like the report, where you have row after row. Click on columnar, and you're looking at basically one record in a form. There is a way to look at multiple records. We'll do that later. But most forms are this columnar format, where the label's on the left and then you got the value of the text box. Let me click on next. And I'll click up there and do the home key and call it My Orders, and click Finish. And it does a report. Now, a couple problems. Actually, before I show you the problems, let's go to Design. And notice how similar this is to the report. I've got a header, a form header here instead of a report header, and then the detail, just like we had in reports, and then a form footer. And just like on reports, if I right click, that's how I turn these things on and off. I've got a page header footer, form header footer. Don't use the page header in a form very often, but you might want to use the form header. I think we'll get rid of it for this form, but I'll leave it up there for right now. Okay, so always remember, just right click in a blank area to turn those headers on and off. Now, what this thing does, it takes all the fields that are short text and long text, and it does a couple of things with them. If I go back to the form, I can press I'm on the first field here, order number. I can press tab to go to the next field, and I can do shift tab to go back. Also, I could do enter, which a lot of people do. They'll type something and then they'll just hit enter, and you can go to the next field that way. If I do that one more time and go to company, notice there's a little vertical scroll bar here, and if I press enter again, it doesn't do anything. Let me show you why that is. If we go back to design, for all the short text and this long text notes field, it's done two things. It's changed the enter key behavior, number one, inside the form, or excuse me, inside the field, to go to the next line. Now, you would want that, if I go back to view, you'd want that up here on notes, like this is a test, enter. This is something else on the next line. So you want to be able to type notes. That's what the long text data type is really valuable for. And forms is where you can put a big box to display those types of things. Now let me go back and delete that. But you don't want to do that with just regular text fields. So I'm going to go back to design, and I'm going to select these fields here, the ones that are taller. Those are the short text fields. And in properties, I'm going to go to other, the other tab. And notice it says enter key behavior. This is one of the few times you'll ever go to other. Oh, and also there's many, many properties you'll never use in here, so don't be intimidated by this. But enter key behavior, if I click on that and look at the choices, it's either that or the default. And the default is what I want. I want enter to go to the next field, okay? Now, one other thing I want to do is if I go to, I'll just go to Format, and if I scroll down, let's see, where are they? We have scroll bars. They're there. See that right in the middle? It says vertical scroll bar. I'm going to pull that down and click on None. Now I'm going to leave that vertical scroll bar in the notes, because you might need it if you type a note that's bigger than the box. But here, we want that to be gone. And so if I go back to design, you can see now I can press enter, 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 enter. It goes right through. I don't have the scroll bars. Okay. So let me go back to design. The other thing that it does, the third thing, is it makes these fields, these text fields, a lot bigger. What I want to do is make them the same height as the other fields. So I'm going to click on Cust ID, and let's see what the height is of that. If I look at Format, or I can click on All, either one, the height is pretty high up in the list of properties. So I'm going to copy that height. It's 0.2292. Now that's, what, like a 10,000th of an inch, 4 decimal places? That's pretty precise. And you'll find that with the grid, you could put something in and it'll jump to the nearest 4-digit number that matches the grid. And that's fine. But using these widths and heights and tops, that is the most precise way to control your form. We'll do a lot of things from the menu, but ultimately that gives you an incredible amount of control. So I'm going to highlight that height. I'll do a Control C. I'll drag through these fields here that are too big, and there's the height, 4167. I'll highlight that, do a Control V to paste in the height from the other field, and when I press enter, they'll all jump to that height. Okay? Okay, the next challenge is to get these to be the same distance apart as the other fields. Now I do have an arrange up here, and size and space. And you might think, oh, okay, let's do equal vertical. That's not going to work. All equal vertical does is it takes the top and the bottom things that you've selected and it spaces everything out equally between them. So in this case, it's literally wouldn't do anything. But if you decrease the vertical, notice it comes up 1 dot width. And then if I go back to size and space, decrease vertical. If I do it 2 more times, size, space, decrease, size, space, decrease. There we go. Nope, I need 1 more. Let me click and drag through there, size, space, decrease. There, so they're all the same. These guys down here, I will click and drag. I'll drag them up so everything is in line, okay? And I like to do that so I can do manipulations of groups of things all together. For instance, subtotal, freight, order total, these currency and number fields are way too wide. I select those and make them maybe more like order date. And then if I click and drag, I can select all 4 of those. This is just like the reports, using the controls, and drag those 4 in, okay? I can also select all of the labels. Remember how in the report we clicked on the left edge and it selects everything all the way across, or I can click on the top and it selects everything straight down. I can do that with these labels. If I click on the top just above the labels, it will select everything. Problem is it selects this label here too, so I'm going to hold Shift and click on the label in the header to unselect. And what I'll do is make these all right justified. So if I go to Format, or I can go to Home, either way, there is a right justify command. So they're right justified, okay? Now I might make a couple of changes. Let me click in a blank area to unselect everything. I'll go ahead and make this the complete word address. Let's see, state's fine. I'll leave the rest of them. I could put a space in order date, a space in order total. So I've got them the way I want them. Now if I select them again, I'll go to the top. Once again, hold Shift and unselect the My Orders. What you can do, and you can do this on one label or all of them, if you go to the left edge, the sizing box on the left edge, and double click on it, it will shrink everything to the text that's in the box. So let me do that. Okay, so it just collapses them all down. So you want to be able to do that before you get these things apart vertically. That way you don't have to spend a lot of time formatting things separately. Now, one other thing you might want to do with your forms, if I click on Company and I drag the right edge out farther, one thing I found people like is when you line up these text boxes with the left edge above each other, they're lined up, or the ending edge is lined up, or both, it looks nicer and it's easier for them to read. It's also denser, more dense, so it's easier. Now I just shrank first name. Let me click on last name, and we're using these sizing handles a lot. I'll just drag it right about here, and maybe I'll size that to the line, bring company in. After a while you'll get really precise with your mouse and get really good at doing that. See how that looks pretty good? If you had a whole bunch of fields like that, it just makes it more readable. Okay? One other thing I'd like to do is, I don't really want a header, so I'm going to click the My Orders label, and I'll just delete it for right now. And then I'll right click in the blank area, and I will unselect Form Header Footer, so that goes away. So this is what you'll do most often with your forms. If I go to, I'll just go to Home and view the form. So I'm looking at one record, and I'm laying out the way it looks on the screen. And I can go one record at a time if I use the record selector on the bottom. Okay? In the next video, we'll clean this up more. We'll put in some rectangles. We'll get a little fancier and dress it up a little bit more. So I'll see you then. So let's keep going on this form. Now, you may not recall, but in the beginning of the course, I showed you where we were going to end up. And I showed you the orders form done. Orders done. Let me double click on that. So this, you may seem like we're a long ways away from this, but we're not. This orders form is where I want this form to be. Now notice I'm not going to do tabs, these tab controls. See how I can click and address, totals, stuff. We will do that when we get back through everything and get to the advanced forms. But I want to get ready for that because see how I've got order date, subtotal, freight, and order total stacked up on top. The labels are on the top and everything is centered. I want to go ahead and do that now. We can put these lines in here and we'll have that piece ready so that when we do get to the tabs, we'll be able to just copy them right in there. So let me go back to My Orders and go to Design. And let's start working with these 4 fields. I'm just going to select them, move them out here, something like that. And what I'm going to do is click on the order date label. And remember, when you are dealing with text boxes and the associated labels that come in with them automatically, this big box at the top left corner, if I click and drag, it will let me move that independently. Otherwise, the label always moves when you move the text box, or the text box itself moves if I move the label. So that's on top, and I'll do the same thing with subtotal. I'll just put subtotal right here, and it puts the label on top of it, but I can drag it over here. Okay, you need to have a nice steady hand with this, but you'll get used to it. Freight. Freight looks awful big. Let's make freight a little narrower. And we'll make the label just as wide. And then order total. And once again, we'll drag the label up to the top. And we'll make it nice and big. Okay, then what I can do is click in a blank area and hold and drag through all those and go up to Format or the Home and click on Center. Let me click on Center. Sometimes it throws it to the left, so I'll click on Center a second time. Everything is centered. Okay, the only thing I need to do, let's see, how did that look? It had lines right below the labels and lines below the fields. So let's put a line in. Let's go up back to Design. You've got your controls here. Here's your line. What I like to do is I'm not going to worry about getting it right in the middle or anything. I'll just pick a spot, hold Shift, click, and drag. And notice I'm way off, but when I let go, I've got a straight line because I was holding Shift. So you always want to hold Shift with your line. Then I can just click and drag it and put it where I want it. And then I can also get the right edge, and I can select it. Whoops, mistake, see how I messed it up? Control Z. I forgot to hold Shift again. When I'm making it longer, see, I can come way out here. It's still going to keep it straight. Okay, and I forgot to do that. Let's also, so I've got that line, it's underneath those labels. If I go to the Format tab, the border width is a default of hairline, and this looks like 2 point to me. So let's highlight that hairline and put a 2 in there and press enter. And we click off of that. That looks pretty much the same. Now to select that line, I'm not going to try and click on it. I'm just going to get my cursor in this little blank area and drag straight down to select it. Control C, Control V. Then I'm just going to use the down arrow. I don't want to use the mouse because I might move right or left and mess it up. If I use the down arrow, I know it's exactly underneath. There we go. So it looks pretty much like this over here. It's a little bit bigger, but that's okay. We can size it down later on. All right. Now, if you look at the address, it's the same thing. Here's an address, city, state, zip. Let's go back and do that. I've got address, city, state, and zip. Let's make address bigger, city smaller, state needs to be a lot smaller. Oop. Get the little double-pronged arrow, bring it in. Get the 4-pronged arrow and drag it up here. Drag zip up here. And when I drag, I'm looking at how much space, I'm leaving space for the label. So when I let go, that word zip will fit in there. Then I can size it down. Maybe I'll leave it about like that and make address a little bit bigger. So it looks something like that. Address, city, state, zip. Okay, so we got 2 pieces ready for when we start doing the other form. Now we had already done, and actually let me drag this stuff all. I'm just going to press the down arrow, select it all, drag it down, get it out of the way. We've already done this part. Okay, if I look at my orders done form, it's already got that in there, but notice how it's inside of a kind of a grayish box. Box kind of looks like it's indented too. So let's do that. Let's go back to my orders, and I'm going to create a rectangle and put it over all these fields. So I'll go back to the Design tab and rectangle. Let's see where the rectangle is. There it is, right there. You can always hover over them and it'll tell you after a pause what that is. I'll click once on the rectangle, and that means I've got a rectangle tied to my mouse cursor when I come down in the form. If that's not what I want, I can just click on the select button on the left, and then I'm back to my normal cursor. Okay, I'll click on rectangle, and I'm going to go out here a little bit above and a little bit to the left, and I'll just drag. That's not quite enough. I'm going to do Control Z. Let me click the rectangle again. There, that looks better. I wanted a couple dots worth of space all the way around. There you go. So I've got that rectangle highlighted. I'll let go. Looks good. Then what I'll do is go to the Format tab for that rectangle. Notice it's just called a box, box 35. And let's see, back color, back style, that's what I want. The back style on rectangles is always transparent by default, but you can change it to normal, and that fills in the rectangle. Problem is that our stuff disappears, but we'll fix that in a minute. Now, notice there's a special effect down here. If I pull that down, sunken, that's what that was. It looked like it was sunken, didn't it? So I'll click on sunken. And then the only other thing to do is to select the back color, okay? But this leads us into the whole topic of color. And that's important on your forms because it's what people are going to be looking at all the time. So notice it says background 1. Now take a look. If you go to the top left corner, I'm on the Design tab. Notice it says colors up here. If I click on that, it's got a whole bunch of color. What the heck are all these things? Violet, median, yellow. What they are is themes. If I click on themes, there's a whole bunch of themes here, okay? And what themes are pre-designed selections of color, combinations of colors, so that things will look good together. Have you ever seen a form where the colors just clash and it doesn't look right? That's what themes can help you out with. And if I go to Excel, let me open up Excel and do a blank workbook. If I go to like page layout, notice that it's exactly the same. As a matter of fact, you can create themes in Excel and use them in Access or the other way around. So all of this applies to Excel also, the themes. As a matter of fact, in the customized Excel course that I've got, I go into that quite a bit, into creating custom themes. All I want you to understand at this point is that the theme, if I go to colors again and I go to customize colors, like I am going to make a new theme, I'm not really going to. Notice what it does. It shows me the current theme, but it shows me all the colors that I can have. Okay, so there's a dozen colors here. There's 4 in this first piece that's text background. So there's a text background dark and a text background light. Then there's a second set, dark 2 and light 2. Then there's 6 accent colors. And then there's a couple colors for hyperlinks, which you won't, that's only if you're using hyperlinks. So really, it's these 10 colors that you're involved with. Okay? So knowing that, it starts to make more sense where you realize over here the back color is background 1. Okay, background 1 is one of these. So let's go ahead and cancel, and let's select the builder button in our color for a back color for our rectangle. Now, it shows you standard colors on the bottom. You can pick any color you want. But the advantage of the theme colors is if you pick theme colors, if you ever change the theme in the future, everything that has a theme color, like I'm accent 3, it's going to jump to the new value of accent 3. So your whole database, your whole spreadsheet, if you're doing it in Excel, could change all at once. And otherwise, you have to literally go back and change everything manually if you use these standard colors. So I encourage you to use the theme colors. Now notice if I put my cursor on this first one, that's the first background. It's background 1, and that's what the rectangle is. It's white. The dark is black. If I go to the next one, notice it's not quite white, it's light gray. That's the second background for light, and the second dark is blue-gray, okay? And then here's the 6 accent colors. Here's the blue, orange, gray, looks like a yellow kind of gold, okay? And notice what they do. This makes it really helpful for your forms. A lot of times you don't need necessarily another color. You just need a little bit different shade of the same color. And that's what this does. Below each of these colors, if I put my cursor on this one, this is lighter, 80%. So it's 80% lighter, but it's still in that same color range of this blue. This is lighter, 60%. This one is lighter, 40%. So I've got 40, 60, 80% lighter. Then I've got darker, 25%, and darker, 50%. Cool. So I've got all 6 of these accent colors, and then I've got 3 values of lighter and 2 values of darker. So they're all in the same range, okay? So I'm just going to pick theme 2, and I'll make it lighter, 80%. There you go. Now let me take a look. That's pretty much what I did over here. Okay? Now if I click off of that, you'll see it does look like it's indented, and it does have that gray color. Now the only problem is it's covering up our fields. So, and we'll do more on colors, so don't worry, we'll go back to that. If I click on the rectangle, let's fix this problem of our fields being covered up. If I go to arrange, I can just send this to the back. And what that means is you can have things stacked up on top of each other. You can have controls on top of controls. You can have rectangles on top of everything else. A lot of the books out there will say, never do that. It's a problem. But, a lot of that advice is 20 years old when computers were way slower than they are now. So I don't even bother with that anymore. Computers are pretty fast. Unless you're doing something really ridiculous, you can have stuff on top of other things with no problem. So I'm going to do send to back, and there are our fields. Okay? And I'll click off of that. that looks pretty good. If I click on home and just view the form, so there's your little company block, your address block. Here's our order total block on the bottom. So we are definitely making progress. Now, what I want to do in the next video is to go over carefully combo boxes. Combo boxes are one of the most powerful things you've got as a tool inside of your forms. And so I want to use a combo box where the state is, and I'll show you a PDF. We'll actually go through step by step by step what to do, how to build it, what to look out for, and then you can do that later. There's a lot of other properties that you can just ignore. So I want to make sure you get this down so that you can use combo boxes, okay? I'll see you in the next video.